Chapter 444. At this moment, Ling Bai slowly stood up. With a complicated and resolute expression on his face, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "I killed her." The square was in an uproar again. The group of nobles on the stairs were dumbfounded. No one expected him to admit it. Ling Bai said word by word, "Anyone could be the ruler, but not her." Tree God said, "Reason?" Ling Bai looked at the corpse on the ground. Ling Yin was still smiling. She didn't seem to know that it was her father who killed her. Ling Bai's eyes were filled with sadness. Because once she becomes the ruler of our Green Tree tribe, she will definitely declare war on the Divine War Alliance. Our tribe will eventually be destroyed. Many people could understand the logic behind it. With an enormous interstellar fleet, well-equipped weapons, advanced technology, and equipment, as well as so many spiritual experts in the human world, the tiny Green Tree clan could not imagine any other outcome other than annihilation if they chose to fight them. Fool! The words in the sky appeared again. Many people could already feel the disappointment of God. At this moment, the face in the sky suddenly shattered. Countless spirit leaves that had lost their luster fell down. Even the sky became dark. The people of Murtage's city were terrified again. They all knelt on the ground. Many people even cowed out. However, Tree God did not appear. Dingming also realized that something was wrong. Not only did the mysterious eyes close, but they also disappeared completely. Even he could not feel the fresh, natural, and pure aura of the super life form. On the contrary, with the disappearance of the super life form, the vitality in the surroundings also began to disappear. Everyone look! The Tree God is changing. Someone was almost crying. Dingming looked carefully. The huge Green Tree God in the middle of the forest had its lush branches and leaves yellowed, withered, and decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye. This huge tree was the symbol of the entire Green Tree tribe. Now that God had disappeared and the huge tree had withered, everyone's faith had collapsed. The scene immediately became chaotic. Some people were screaming, some were kowtowing, and some were running down the mountain. However, more people were running for their lives. Don't panic, everyone. For the future of our race, the king has sacrificed his most beloved daughter. Now, the people of the God War Alliance are rushing here. We will cooperate with them to develop this forest. From now on, we will have enough food and clothing. We will also have starships to travel in space. We can also live a better life like the human race. Everyone, please be patient. Those who are willing to follow the king, please come to the square. Hearing this, Spiritual Sword was furious. He pulled out the red pearl sword, and the green light immediately shone on the whole place. He gritted his teeth and said, "So you have already colluded with the Alliance and used the fleet of the Alliance to exhaust the divine power of the Tree God. You want to sell our home to the enemy while you enjoy the luxurious life of human beings and let our people become slaves of human beings. A bunch of bastards." He cursed as he flew towards the high priest. Dingming hurriedly turned his head and asked Nikona, "Is that true?" Nikona's eyes were filled with sadness, but more than that, there was fear. "I can no longer sense the aura of the Lord God. It may have dissipated or it may have left. In any case, it is no longer in this place. It is very disappointed in our race. As she spoke, tears fell from her eyes. It was obvious that she was already in despair. Dingming muttered to herself, "Is that the case?" Xiao Ai's tone was grave. "It is extremely likely that the super life form has foreseen what is happening right now. It is impossible for it to truly die. It is very likely that it used some kind of teleportation technique to leave this place. The fact that this divine tree is rotting can prove this point." Jun Ling took Nikona's hand. "Don't be afraid. Act according to the will of the Lord. I will cover you to the temple and take the Holy Spirit." The square of the palace was indeed very chaotic. The destruction of the Tree God had directly caused the sky to darken. All sorts of cries rang out in the city. The royal family, aristocrats, and young talents inside and outside the palace were all at a loss. Only Ling Jian charged towards the high priest recklessly. "Don't be impudent." The high priest was a top-notch existence in the Green Tree race. With a casual wave of his hand, Ling Jian was sent flying and fell next to Ling Yun's corpse. The high priest was still speaking loudly. The king has even sacrificed the princess. His goal is to let our green tree race escape from the fate of slash-and-burn farming for thousands of years. We want to have our own beautiful and prosperous city and paradise like the humans. Everyone, please do not panic. Invite all the sect masters and elders to come to the square. A bunch of nonsense. Ling Jian couldn't help but crawl up and roar furiously. Even their own daughter can be cruelly killed. What's the difference between such a race and beasts? Following you will only bring the green tree race to its doom. Brothers and sisters, my elder sister saw all of this. That was why she was willing to stand out bravely to be the king. Young friends, please don't be blinded by your own eyes and stain your hands with sin. If you are willing to be a true member of the green tree race, please stand by my side and protect our homeland together. Chase away the God War Alliance and call back our supreme tree god. With a shout, more than half of the young people in the square ran over and stood by his side. The young people were still hot-blooded. Their hearts hadn't died yet. They couldn't accept the outcome of their benevolent and loving princess being assassinated by a conspiracy. Now, no one could control this chaotic situation anymore. Ding Ming secretly used the Assimilating Heart Sutra and transmitted a message to the spiritual sword. Hurry up and take your sister's body away. No matter what, you must preserve it. Upon hearing Ding Ming's voice, Ling Jian realized that Ding Ming's bird of light had unknowingly flown onto Ling Yun's body. It lowered its head and cooed. Ling Jian was instantly shocked. Ling Yun and the bird of light actually emitted a faint divine aura at the same time. At this moment, he no longer had any doubts. He rushed forward and carried Ling Yun's body. Capture these traitors and kill them without mercy. The high priest began to give orders. With his order, the surrounding soldiers raised their javelins and halberds and charged towards the center of the square. The young people in the square also didn't want to be outdone. They all pulled out their swords and sabers and began to parry. However, these young people still couldn't compare with these guards whose strength was close to that of a combat master. Their swords and sabers only symbolically blocked twice. Then some of them fell out of their hands, and some of them broke off their arms. Flesh and blood splattered all over the square. The army of the God War Alliance had yet to arrive. On the contrary, the Green Tree tribe had already started to kill each other. At this moment, at the top of the palace, Jun Ling and Nicole had already quietly snuck into the main hall of the shrine. In the center of the main hall, there was a ball of green energy floating in the air. This was the Greenwood Holy Spirit. Jun Ling looked at it curiously. How do we take it away? Nicole was a little nervous. My tribe's Holy Spirit is the protection of God. It brings abundant vitality and rejuvenation power. Only pure people can touch it. I'll try. After saying that, she slowly stretched out her arms and muttered something. As expected, under her summoning, the Holy Spirit seemed to have awakened. It constantly spread out circles of green light in all directions. Then, it slowly flew towards Nicole. With a swoosh, the Holy Spirit actually merged with Nicole. It looked like a green pupil of light was covering her body. Nicole was like a saintess in the celestial light. She floated in the air, holy and solemn. Wow! Jun Ling was also dazzled by it. This energy is really strange. Nicole said, the Holy Spirit must not fall into the hands of the God War Alliance. As long as it exists in our Green Tree tribe, our tribe will not be exterminated. Jun Ling decisively pulled out his dagger. Let's go. I'll protect you. Let's go to the factory and meet up with Elephant and the others. Nicole nodded and quickly walked out of the temple. She forgot one thing. Not only did the Holy Spirit fluctuate greatly, it was also constantly spreading out circles of light. It couldn't be seen in the main hall of the temple. However, when she ran out, with a swoosh, a green light spread out. The green light immediately lit up the entire palace. How could such a conspicuous light be hidden from the high priest? She stole the Holy Spirit. Kill her for me. The high priest shouted at the top of his lungs. The guard in the plaza all turned and threw the javelins in their hands at the three-story pavilion like a storm. Dang, 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 dang. Junling's dagger danced in the air, blocking the javelins with all his might. However, even though the Green Tree Tribe technology was lacking, they were all experts in close combat in the jungle. These guards were like monkeys climbing straight up the wall. They flipped over the fence in a few moves and leaped onto the third floor of the rooftop. At this time, countless specks of light fell rapidly from the sky. Then, they quickly gathered into an icy blue brilliance. The brilliance flashed a few times, and the 5 or 6 guards who had just climbed onto the roof fell back down. Ding Ming stood in front of Junling to protect her. Catoptric deflection had already transformed into a large sword. You guys go. I'll hold them back and protect Nicole. Go to the factory and find the elders to think of a solution. Junling now also sensed that most of the young people in the plaza had already been slaughtered. A large number of soldiers were rushing towards the palace from the foot of the mountain. These treants were fully equipped and moved in an orderly manner. This was clearly the Green Tree Tribe's army. There were no less than 50,000 people. Further away, there were still armed forces continuously gathering. Junling knew that such a large number of enemies was not something she could deal with. She frowned and said, "What about you?" Ding Ming said, "Don't worry. I'm not good at anything else, so I'm definitely better at escaping than you guys. Hurry up and go." Junling nodded. She turned around and hugged Nicole. The prototype's boots spat out crystal flames, and the two of them rose into the air, dragging a long trail of crystal flames behind them. "You must not let them escape," the high priest roared anxiously. Wave after wave of javelins and arrows rained down from the palace. Of course, these attacks were completely negligible to the prototype. The prototype might not be good at anything else, but its defense was surprisingly strong. Chapter 445. Ling Jian carried the corpse and escaped in the chaos. Junling carried Nicole and flew away. At this moment, only Ding Ming was left on the rooftop of the palace. The high priest was shocked and angry. "You little human, instead of working for your alliance, why are you helping the traitors?" In his mind, Ding Ming was sent by the God War Alliance. Therefore, during the worship ceremony, Ding Ming and Junling were not expelled. However, Ding Ming was too lazy to explain it to him. There were 2 high priests in total. The one who was yelling in front of him was tall, while the other was short. The high priest had always been protecting the spirit wall. The spirit wall had now retreated to a position far away. Ding Ming was not thinking about how to deal with this group of people in front of him, but how to deal with the situation once the ground forces of the alliance arrived. The high priest spoke again. "I understand. You are a traitor of the God War Alliance." Ding Ming sneered. It seems that Prince Ling Jian was not talking nonsense. "You have colluded with the alliance in advance." The high priest angrily said, "Nonsense. The king is thinking about the future of our race." Ding Ming lightly said, "If you really mix with that Jian, you'll have no future at all." The high priest angrily said, "Then I will clean up the mess for Mr. Ji today." He kept saying that he would clean up the mess, but he did not do it himself. Instead, he hid far away in the square. Instead, the guards around him had surrounded the rooftop. In Ding Ming's perception, the army at the foot of the mountain was not a problem. On the contrary, the palace guards were very troublesome. These people had the strength close to the combat masters. A single guard was easy to deal with, but if they worked together, it would be troublesome. Ding Ming held his long sword and coldly glanced at the more than 20 guards around him. It was not a good idea to kill a bloody path. It was better to think of a way quickly. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He could give a try from where he was standing. Ding Ming slowly retreated, and the guard around him also slowly approached. These treants were all about 4 meters tall. Ding Ming, who was in the middle of the encirclement, was like a wolf surrounded by a herd of wild horses. When he retreated to the gate of the temple, Ding Ming suddenly waved his hand. With a flash of sword light, a corner of the gate of the temple was immediately cut off. Although the gate was made of high-quality wood, it was as fragile as tofu in front of the mirror's flower, water moon. His sword's strike caused many of the guards to turn pale with fright. The temple was also the supreme symbol of the Green Tree tribe. It was the resting place of the god. Normally, when the people worshipped it, the guards would not even dare to come up. Now that Ding Meng had destroyed the door, these tree men were also quite frightened. They quickly surrounded him. This move was to force these people not to use ice or fire martial arts, so as to avoid damaging the temple. Therefore, the first to come up was definitely an expert of the light element. 3 or 4 figures flashed. This was definitely something like the transit steps. Ding Meng did not even think about it, and directly rolled into the gate. The bone spurs and daggers of the newcomers abruptly retracted halfway. Everyone was afraid of damaging the holy relic, so Ding Meng stabbed his sword into the ground and used the momentum of the sword to bounce back. He kicked a few times in the air and knocked over a few people. For people who were moving at light speed, directly fell off the rooftop. The trance behind immediately followed. Ding Meng saw the opportunity and slashed his sword in the air. This was the combination of source energy and telekinesis. A gust of wind formed by the sword swept up all the stone slabs on the ground and smashed them towards the back of the group. The trance were big and tall. At such a close distance, it was difficult for them to dodge. They were all caught off guard and covered their faces. Of course, this injury was not fatal. Taking advantage of this fleeting opportunity, Ding Meng shot forward like a sharp arrow after landing on the ground. His sword was behind him and his shoulder was in front of him. He was not in the mood to kill these people, so he used his shoulder to forcefully knock the group of burly men away. The rooftop was now like a flower pot, and a bunch of guards flew out like a fairy, scattering flowers. Ding Meng leaped into the air and threw out the sword with a flip of his hand. Driven by his psyche power, the sword split the sky like a rainbow and turned into a cold light that suddenly attacked the corner of the square. He did not have any other intentions. If he wanted to control the situation, he had to first take down the tall priest. "Protect the Lord! Protect the king!" Exclamations rang out in the square. Immediately, 2 cold lights attacked from both sides. Ding ding! 2 crisp sounds rang out. The 2 long swords were immediately broken in half. The catoptric deflection sword's momentum was not affected at all. The long sword flew over the heads of the crowd. When it was 20 meters away from the high priest, it encountered a forest of swords and spears. Ding Meng, who was at the back, tiptoed over the heads of the crowd. His whole body flew high into the air. With a twist of his wrist, the dozens of weapons were smashed into pieces by the catoptric deflection sword. They turned into countless bright sparks that scattered in all directions. The long sword began to spin. It turned into a bright disk and turned towards the high priest. This series of attacks had already pierced a path in the center of the square. At least 30 guards were injured. The high priest did not panic. When the disc was about to hit him, his whole body shook and an invisible telekinesis was released. Although the long sword was still spinning, it froze in the air 10 meters away from him. The high priest's reputation was not just for show. He really did have some strength. However, his telekinesis was not on par with Ding Meng's. Ding Meng's eyes were almost triangular. A large amount of telekinesis was released from his body. The disc was slowly advancing towards the high priest. The high priest's eyes were clearly trying to block it. Seeing the disc getting closer and closer, when it was less than 4 meters away from his face, Ding Meng suddenly felt an icy chill. This was not ice origin energy. Instead, it was an enormous danger that was about to descend. The short priest who had been standing beside the spirit wall suddenly exploded with large amounts of silver light. It surged out like mercury, shooting into the air and quickly becoming a dazzling stream of light. It was as if the Milky Way was descending from the heavens. Ding Meng's reaction was as fast as lightning. Almost at the same time, he withdrew all of his telekinesis and let the high priest telekinesis wall hit him. He borrowed the force of the telekinesis wall and floated back like a kite. A few tenths of a second before the stream of light arrived, there was a zhung sound as the exquisite diamond mirror appeared on his body. Ding, 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 ding. The stream of light hit the diamond shield. It was as if dozens of incomparably sharp short swords were shooting at it. The sound was like pearls falling on a plate. With a crisp ding-ling sound, even the diamond shield created by the Diamond Star secret art was shattered. Only then did Ding Meng get a shock. Concentrating his origin ability energy below his legs, he quickly used the Imperial Wind technique. Using the tip of his foot on the shoulder of a treant, he forcefully kicked off, creating a mirage as he retreated 30 meters away. His boots then fiercely stomped on the ground, and his entire body was like a large bird as he leisurely floated to a flagpole at the edge of the square. When the distance between them increased, the stream of light's attack gradually weakened. Ding Meng could now clearly see that it wasn't a real stream of light. Instead, it was a very peculiar weapon. It seemed to be the same as catoptric deflection and was composed of small pieces of metal fragments. However, the dwarf priest's metal fragments were in the shape of a crescent moon. They were linked together, and when they didn't launch an attack, they would retract and form a steel ring that hung on the dwarf priest's bone with scepter. Even with Ding Meng's sharp eyes, he hadn't been able to see that it was a weapon. This kind of weapon could only be controlled by fluxers. When the dwarf priest made his move, Xiao AI immediately identified the type of telekinesis. Attention, this is a pure kinetic-type telekinesis. Kinetic-type telekinesis was the most common type of telekinesis. It was almost the basic telekinesis of warlocks. The reason for this was very simple. Its function was to control objects from a distance. It didn't have the ability to control objects from a distance like the infectious-type telekinesis, and it also didn't have the gorgeous colors of ice, fire, or light-type telekinesis. Therefore, it was somewhat mediocre among the many telekinesis types. After all, most telekinesis types could achieve telekinesis effects. However, it was simple, pure, practical, rich in transformations, and had both offensive and defensive capabilities. When it was used by the dwarf priest, the steel ring could actually achieve this kind of effect. It could be said that the kinetic-type telekinesis had been used to its pinnacle. Ding Meng knew that he couldn't reach this level. However, now wasn't the time to think about this. After he was forced to retreat, the dense crowd of people in the plaza rushed toward the flagpole. This was truly a typical tactic of using numbers to overwhelm him. Ding Meng felt that he had been somewhat careless. The experts of Green Tree Clan weren't as weak as he had imagined. If the two high priests had joined hands, he reckoned that he would have had a chance. But now, enemies were everywhere. Ding Meng steeled his heart and fiercely activated the first 6 origin points. With a whoosh, he swept his palms through the air. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion echoed. What the sacred Yang Tiger Palm swept out was a fiery red flood of origin energy. The quaint and spacious plaza instantly turned into a furnace of purgatory. The shockingly hot origin energy swept through the crowd. Not to mention that these people didn't even have a corpse left. Even the ground was scorched and steaming. The first floor of the palace began to catch fire, and the fire quickly spread. The two high priests were also stunned. This kind of psionic foundation was no less than theirs. This young human looked weak, but his body contained such a powerful force. The two of them couldn't help but look at each other. The meaning in their eyes was clear. We can't let this person go. Ding Meng didn't plan to leave either. Without hesitation, he stabbed his sword through the air. Countless bright, white silhouettes swept down like a rainstorm, and the target was the dwarf priest. After spending 3 long years on the expedition, he had already mastered the solitary sword of Zhao. Now, he didn't even need to gather energy. He could casually use the silver eagle sweeping the land. Since you want to use that strange weapon to deal with me, then I'll return the favor in the same way. At this time, the king had already been escorted down the mountain by the many guards. The dwarf priest no longer had any concerns. He seemed to have guessed that a human expert like Ding Meng definitely didn't only have one telekinesis skill. Thus, he also waved the bone scepter in his hand. The scepter danced and emitted a dark green and gentle energy flow. Without a doubt, this was definitely origin energy. This green energy formed a slowly rotating spherical shield around the dwarf priest's body. The surface of the shield flickered with all kinds of mysterious and complex runes. This was without a doubt the Green Tree clan's ultimate technique. Chapter 446. Ding Meng didn't care what kind of unique skill he was using. Once he used the silver eagle sweeping the earth, the sword rain would tear him to pieces. Puff, 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 puff. The rain of swords did not shatter the shield, nor did it cause a violent impact. The shield seemed to have a strange suction force that greatly slowed down the momentum of the rain of swords. This situation was a bit like a slow-motion scene in a movie. It was clearly an earth-shattering storm, but it froze halfway through. Although the sword light that flew in front of the dwarf priest pierced the shield, it only went halfway. The sword light was caught by the shield. Just as Ding Meng was about to use the Condor Strike, Xiao AI decisively reminded him, "Watch out for your left side." Ding Meng noticed from the corner of his eye that the high priest had created an identical shield. He pushed his palms forward, and the shield directly left his body and flew into the air. It wasn't fast, but it was right between the dwarf priest and Ding Meng. Danger! Ding Meng realized that something was wrong. He immediately stopped attacking and quickly fell from the flagpole. At this moment, the dwarf priest waved his scepter, and the shield also left his body and hit the other shield in the air at an amazing speed. When the two shields collided, the nearby air was suddenly distorted, and then there was a bang sound. This explosion was even more exaggerated than the Holy Tiger Yang palm just now. A green torrent directly drowned Ding Meng, and the sword light that was sent out hit Ding Meng back. As for the square, it couldn't be called a square anymore. It was completely a sea of green. The high priest heaved a sigh of relief. This kid really took us a lot of effort. The dwarf priest frowned and said, "This person is not from the God War Alliance. Every time I went to the space station, I didn't see him." The high priest said, "It doesn't matter if he is or not. Anyway, he is dead now. The Alliance can't find out even if they want to." He didn't finish his sentence because both his and the dwarf priest's expression changed at the same time. A figure walked out from the torrent. The person he originally thought was dead seemed to be completely fine. Ding Meng's entire body was dyed green, and the clothes on his upper body had been torn to shreds. The shockwave from the explosion of the metal shield and the reflected sword light had still hit him. But so what? He was no longer the Ding Meng from 3 years ago. His body had been tempered to be even harder than alloy. "You." The high priest was clearly shocked. "The blue sky strange poison is useless." Ding Meng spat out a mouthful of green saliva. He had a rough idea of what the two of them were thinking. One shield would absorb the attack, while the other shield would secretly release poison. When the two shields collided, the energy explosion would injure the opponent, and they could also use the same method to deal with the opponent. The safest way was to use harmful chemicals to completely destroy the opponent. If it were people like Junling and Ling Jian, there would be absolutely no possibility of escaping. They would definitely be killed. However, Ding Meng, this freak, was not afraid of these crooked things. Did they really think that the cave virus was just for decoration? Blue sky, strange poison? Ding Meng's mouth revealed a strange smile. "I'll let you have a taste of my safflower divine poison. Take it." As he spoke, he swept up. The high priest quickly raised his scepter as if he was facing a great enemy. In midair, Ding Meng slapped down with one hand, and a bright red thing flew towards their feet. Shwa shwa, the two blue sky spirit shields once again covered the two of them. However, Ding Meng somersaulted in the air and used transient steps to disappear with a schwa sound. The two of them had already spread out their telekinesis, but Ding Meng did not appear behind them. Who knew where he had flashed to? "What is this?" The short priest was still afraid of the bright red thing on the ground. The high priest stared at it and couldn't help but fly into a rage. "Bastard! How is this safflower divine poison?" This was clearly the canned food that the galactic pirates in the God War Starfield usually ate. The packaging was just a layer of red film, and there wasn't even a logo. When Ding Meng took care of Ing Chungli's group, he naturally wanted to loot all the food on the butcher. The two high priests were actually fooled by Ding Meng like 3-year-old children. Using their telekinesis to sense, the two of them realized that Ding Meng was just faking his shot. Now he was running down the mountain in a panic. The short priest looked puzzled. Where is he going? What is he trying to do? The high priest also didn't understand. The army at the foot of the mountain was like a tide. If he wanted to escape, he shouldn't have run into the crowd. The direction he was running in was a bit wrong. The army at the foot of the mountain could be described in this way. There were so many of them that even if they just stood there and let you slash them, you probably wouldn't be able to kill them all. Therefore, the two of them didn't chase after him. But how could they know the truth? When Ding Meng was submerged in the poisonous stream, Xiao AI decisively warned them that Jian's vanguard had already entered the Divine Forest and was heading towards King City. This army had a total of 8 small teams, each with 16 people. They were all flying units, and many of them were equipped with armor. If he didn't run now, he probably wouldn't be able to run later. Ding Meng wasn't interested in playing with the two of them. Seeing Ding Meng rush towards the army at the foot of the mountain, the high priest sneered disdainfully. It would be strange if he could run away. Not only did Ding Meng run away, but something strange also happened. In the eyes of the two high priests, the first team of 50 people rushed towards them from the mountainside. However, as they were rushing, the 50 people suddenly stopped in their tracks, as if they were possessed. Yes, the high priest confirmed that he wasn't seeing things. These people stopped moving and didn't stand still. They were all in the same position as a second ago. Some were holding javelins, some were waving swords, some were running, but their feet were suspended in the air. Everyone seemed to be under some kind of mysterious spell. They couldn't move at all, and even their expressions were frozen. This scene gave people the illusion that time had stopped. It was only when Ding Meng flew over their heads and ran far away that the 50 people woke up. They all stared at each other, not knowing what had just happened. Where was the enemy? Just a moment ago, there had clearly been an enemy rushing down from the mountaintop. So where had he gone? The same situation quickly happened to the second team. Ding Meng seemed to have passed through no man's land. The tip of his foot lightly tapped the crowd's head, and he took a few steps in the air before flying away. There was no need to say much about what happened next. The army of several tens of thousands was completely turned into wooden dummies in front of Ding Meng. Wherever Ding Meng flew, the people there would turn into idiots. After a few more ups and downs, Ding Meng's figure disappeared into the depths of the darkness. The high priest was flustered and exasperated. What exactly is going on? The dwarf high priest was also puzzled. Could this be the legendary magic? What kind of magic was this? Ding Meng's move came from the Mao Xing civilization's Terminator spell. This spell allowed one's mental force to invade a living being's body and freeze their senses and consciousness, causing their brain to enter a dormant state. From there, they would lose control of their body. Thus, it was named Terminator. Only Fluxers with universal mental force and infectious mental force could cultivate this spell. This spell seemed to be heaven-defying, but the conditions to use it were actually very harsh. It had to be within a certain range for it to be effective. Next, the target of the spell had to be a living being with self-consciousness. Furthermore, the consumption of mental force to freeze a target 5 meters away and a target 50 meters away was completely different. With Ding Meng's current level of mental force, he could only control a range of 100 meters. Moreover, within this range, Terminator was only effective against ordinary soldiers and low-level origin ability users. If it was an expert with tyrannical strength or formidable willpower, this spell would be completely useless. If he encountered a powerhouse with universal mental force, Terminator would not only be useless, it would also suffer a backlash. Thus, in Xiao AI's eyes, Terminator could only be considered a low-level spell. Naturally, this was when compared to the martial arts of the Mao Xing civilization, but for the Green Tree clan, this spell could be considered an immortal spell. After Ding Meng left, he didn't dare to slow down and quickly turned back along the path he had come from. The current situation in the forest was chaotic and complicated, but Thousand Leaves Sect was definitely a safe place. Luo Buluo was definitely a follower of Spirit Sword. After all, this was the territory under Spirit Sword's daily management. At this moment, he could see Luo, Buluo, Ingu, Su Sheng, and the others on the mountain stream. Ling Yun's corpse was placed on a wooden frame, and Spirit Sword was standing to the side with a gloomy expression. It could be seen that the relationship between the siblings was very deep. Ding Ming quickly rushed over. "Let's go, go." Spirit Sword looked very confused. "Where to?" Ding Ming said, "This place is no longer safe. The Alliance's ground troops will arrive soon. There's still a glimmer of hope if we go to the factory." Spirit Sword said, "But I have to find a place to bury my sister, right?" The light bird flapped its wings and said, "Bury what? She's not dead." Spirit Sword was instantly stunned. The light bird explained, "You forgot that when your tree god conferred her as the monarch, he injected a lot of spirit leaves into her body." Spirit Sword frowned and said, "I remember that when the monarch was conferred before, wasn't like this." The light bird said, "I've been sensing around her corpse. These spirit leaves produced a mysterious power that protected her spirit body. That's why her soul didn't scatter, and her spirit body is still there. But she clearly doesn't have a heartbeat." Spirit Sword clearly didn't know much about living things. The light bird also knew that now wasn't the time to explain in detail, so it simply said, "The sacred spirit is in Nicole's hands. If we find Nicole, we'll have a way to revive her." Luo Buluo also hurriedly said, "Lord Spirit Sword, Princess Ling Yun is the sage of our Green Tree tribe. Her reputation is very high among the major tribes and sections. Only when she's revived can we find a way to counterattack King City. Hurry up and leave. Our Thousand Leaves sect will follow your footsteps and migrate as a whole." Spirit Sword was still somewhat hesitant because his eyes were looking at Ding Ming. In the end, he didn't really trust Ding Ming. If it wasn't for Ding Ming, he would have fought to the death with Ding Ming. However, the current situation was so complicated and Ling Yun had been murdered. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't panicking. The light bird said, "Don't hesitate anymore. Hurry up and take the corpse away. Although your old man is still in King City, he hasn't received the recognition of your tree god as the monarch. Your sister was appointed by the tree god. As long as she's alive, your people will listen to her orders." These words woke him up. Spirit Sword quickly carried the corpse on his shoulder and said decisively, "Let's go. We'll move in the direction of the factory and meet up with Miss June and the others." Chapter 447. Ding Ming continued to run in the direction of the Bone Leaf tribe, but the closer he got, the more his heart sank. This was because the natural environment along the way had undergone a tremendous change. The originally lush green forest had become pitch black, and the vegetation that had been brimming with spirituality had all been polluted, turning into dead black objects. Even the great river on the grassland had turned a dark red. It was obvious that there were many harmful substances mixed in. This was definitely the result of the First Fleet's attack on the super life form, firing those hybrid missiles. Although the super life form could intercept the missiles in midair to ensure the safety of the central forest, the pollution and radiation produced by the explosions would spread to the outer perimeter. As Ding Ming continued to turn back, he saw the corpses of tree ants along the way. These tree ants had clearly been poisoned. Their skin had turned black, as if they had been burned. They must have struggled with all their might before dying, and they must have died in excruciating pain. The outer perimeter had become a stony environment similar to the one on planet Madison. Everything had lost its vitality, falling into a state of death. Soon, he finally saw Jun Ling and Nicole carefully advancing through the forest in front of him. Ding Ming quickly chased after them. Jun Ling's expression didn't become happy because of his safe return. On the contrary, her expression was extremely heavy, and her voice was somewhat hoarse. Many people died. They were all poor people, and they were all poisoned to death. The Alliance's poison is even more powerful than the poison on planet Madison. Although she was used to fighting and killing, she had always been killing monsters or attacking powerful origin ability users. She had never laid her hands on ordinary people. However, now that the poor people of the Green Tree tribe had suffered such a calamity, She really couldn't bear to continue watching. Ding Meng also sighed. He wasn't clear about the rules of the God Warstar Field, but on the side of the Holy Grail Federation, the Federal Empire's fleet was forbidden from using such catastrophic chemical weapons unless there was a special reason or a special authorization from the higher-ups. That bastard Ji Yin really did treat these Green Tree tribe members like animals. He killed and poisoned them as he pleased. After walking for a long distance, they saw more and more corpses along the way. Even the river was filled with floating corpses. Although Ding Meng had seen a lot of death, he still felt very uncomfortable this time. Just like the massacre on planet KV-303, countless refugees screamed and struggled to escape, but they still couldn't escape the pirates' merciless slaughter. And this time, these poor tribal people were probably still worshipping their great god, but they didn't expect an apocalyptic catastrophe to descend from the sky. With such a large area of pollution, they didn't even have a place to escape. Perhaps they didn't even know who poisoned them to death. It was already hard enough for these poor people to live, but they didn't expect that they would die so tragically. The three of them quickly entered the territory of the Bone Leaf tribe. The small courtyard of Nicona's house was right in front of them, but all the trees had turned black. Nicona was already crying out in alarm as she rushed in. Father, mother, two withered and blackened Trant corpses were curled up on the ground. The two old men were probably poisoned as they struggled to crawl out of the tree hole. However, halfway through, they died from the poison. Dad! Mom! Nicona lay on the ground, hugging the two corpses as she wailed. The dark green energy of the Holy Spirit touched the corpses, and the corpses quickly returned to their normal light green color. However, the two old men's eyes were tightly shut, and they didn't wake up. This meant that their spiritual bodies had completely disappeared, and even the Holy Spirit couldn't save them. Junling was so angry that he pulled out his dagger with a swoosh. His hands were trembling. I will kill those bastards with my own hands. Ding Meng sighed. I said before that the king's so-called cooperation ended up like this. There's no future to speak of. At this moment, the wristband vibrated, and Kataga's communication came through. Ding Meng, where are you right now? From the screen, Kataga's position was at the entrance of the factory. In the wilderness in the distance, there was a brightly lit supply ship. Not only did the connecting cabin extend out, but the cabin doors were all open. There were people at the bottom of the starship, and judging from their figures, they were probably from the Green Tree tribe. Ding Meng replied, I'll be there right away. After turning off the communication, they saw Nicona grief-stricken and in great pain. Only after Junling comforted her did Nicona reluctantly put down the corpses and follow the two of them to the factory. At this moment, the factory situation was very bad. The plaza inside the factory was filled with Green Tree tribe members. These were not severely poisoned, but the poison was still spreading. Many people's skin had already begun to wither, and their life signs were slowly disappearing. Elephant and the others were busy moving medical equipment from the warehouse. The medical cabins could be used, but the Green Tree tribe members were much taller than humans, so they couldn't fit in at all. They could only put in the young Trants for treatment first. As for the adult Trants, they could only rely on medicine. The side effects of the hybrid missile were indeed very severe. Even if they took antidotes and blood-generating agents, they only delayed the spread of the poison and didn't solve the root of the problem. Shui Mountain and Yang Wei walked over, their expressions very grave. Ding Meng, save these people. They are all poor people from the nearby tribes. I know you have the ability to do so. Shui Mountain's tone sounded like he was pleading. As the Devourer tribe that plundered the world, he was actually somewhat similar to the Green Tree tribe. From the perspective of biological evolution, they were all tribes that relied on their unique natural environment to survive. Therefore, Shui Mountain didn't dislike the Green Tree tribe. Ding Meng nodded and shouted, Elephant, little leopard. The two of them immediately rushed over from afar. Mr. Ting, Ding Meng said, go find 2 buckets and fill them with clean water. Don't fill them with water from the river. The 2 buckets of water were quickly brought over. These were the fresh drinking water in the factory. Ding Meng exerted a little force and sprinkled a few drops of blood into the buckets. Take this and distribute it to these poisoned people. Everyone will be cured after drinking a small mouthful. Those who aren't poisoned must not drink it. If they drink it, they will die immediately. Elephant and Little Leopard picked up the buckets and rushed into the crowd. Yang Wei, who was next to them, was dumbfounded. Even the medical device can't cure the poison. Aren't you a little too hasty? Ding Ming didn't have time to explain to him. He turned and walked out of the gate. Kataga was waiting for him. However, the next moment, Yang Wei's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. After drinking the water, these tree men recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Their ulcerated skin quickly returned to its normal light green color in a few seconds. Many of the tree men who were lying on the ground and groaning in pain immediately got up and jumped around. Of course, many of them quickly realized that this was because of Ding Ming. So, one by one, they stood up and covered their foreheads. They all saluted Ding Ming's back to show their gratitude. Kataga had also been waiting for a long time. He was already explaining the situation here to Ding Ming. He had hijacked a supply ship of the First Fleet. Actually, it wasn't really a hijacking because the crew on the starship were mostly his old subordinates. So, he had successfully landed here. He had also seen the miracle of the super life form on the starship's radar. The facts proved that his initial worries were justified. However, there were thousands of injured people lying around the starship. These tree men were not poisoned. Instead, they were contaminated by radiation. They had to be treated slowly. The order from the Alliance's higher-ups was to use force only as a last resort. However, Jian was so brutal. This was the Blue Light Group's intention, Kataga explained. I've already contacted our Long Voyage Alliance. Our higher-ups have already sent a fleet to depart. What's your Long Voyage Alliance's plan now? Ding Ming thought to himself that the 6 major factions were not united. It was still the same logic. When the forest was big, there would be all kinds of birds. Moreover, the God War Alliance was such a huge organization. There were bound to be differences between the factions. Kataga had a thoughtful look on his face. The Green Divine Wood's superconducting or cannot be exploited, even though I know that this metal is very important to the Alliance. The God War Star Ring was able to float in space and grow continuously. To a large extent, it relied on the superconducting ore. It was unlike the space stations and starships that relied on crystal sources. This was because the size of Star Ring was larger than that of an ordinary planet. It would produce a strong suction force. When superconductors were placed in a magnetic field, they would avoid many magnetic flux lines and produce a diamagnetic effect. This was why the Star Ring was able to float completely. If a crystal source was used as the power system, not to mention whether it could support the Star Ring, the number of silver core stones required would be astronomical. The reason Kataga opposed the exploitation of the ore was none other than the existence of the super life form. The scene of the First Fleet being sucked away by the space-time black hole had left a deep impression on him. He was even glad that Ji Yin wanted to deal with him and forced him to flee. If he continued to be the commander of the fleet, he would not only be dead now, but his soul would also be destroyed. It was unwise for the Alliance to make an enemy of such a super life form. The God War Alliance was strong, but was this super life form weak? Did it have any other means? Did it have any companions? Was there any other power that he did not know or even could not imagine? These were all unknowns. It had to be said that as a commander, Kataga's consideration of problems was very detailed and comprehensive. Ding Ming said, "Why did the Long Voyage Alliance send a fleet here?" Kataga's face darkened again. The First Fleet was the fleet of the Long Voyage Alliance. It was gone just like that. Who can you blame? Peace must be restored to Planet 36, but with the current situation, peace is not something that can be achieved through negotiation. His words were very tactful, but Ding Ming could still understand. Peace was won through force. Kataga was a commander after all. He could not take this lying down. If he really did, the Long Voyage Alliance would not be able to raise its head in front of the Blue Light Corporation when they return to Starlink in the future. It might even affect the relationship between the 6 major factions. Of course, these problems were not something that people at the level of Ding Ming and Kataga could worry about. In short, It was time to think a way to deal with Ji Yin and those bastards. Chapter 448. The command center of the supply ship, naturally, could not be compared to the mothership. Not only was it small, but many of the facilities were also very simple. Right now, the main control console was turned on, but all of the surface maps had been deleted by Katega. This was because the super forest that they had scanned in space was completely different from the actual situation. Ding Ming looked at the interstellar map and said, "How long will it take for your Alliance's fleet to get here?" Katega muttered, "Under normal circumstances, it should take 10 days. Ding Ming stared at him. "Our current position is definitely exposed to the enemy starship's quantum radar. Can you guarantee that Ji Yin won't come looking for us within 10 days? Katega laughed coldly. "I can't guarantee that, but if I'm not mistaken, that guy is obsessed with money. Right now, he's definitely digging a mine in the middle of the forest. He won't be in the mood to come looking for trouble with me." Ding Ming frowned. "He won't come looking for trouble with you. But the problem is that the sacred spirit is with Nikona. The king and the 2 priests will definitely come looking for trouble with us. The Green Tree Tribe's army will definitely come looking for us." Katega frowned as well. He had just found out about what had happened in the palace from Junling. With the strength of his side, it was almost impossible for them to contend against the Green Tree Tribe's army. First of all, there were only a few of them who could fight. Other than himself, Ding Ming, and Junling, the others could be said to be unable to fight. There were about 600 Trant warriors from the nearby tribes. Together with Silverdale, Su Sheng, and the other elders, they seemed to be able to put up a fight. However, if they were to really face the Green Tree Tribe's army, these stragglers would probably be thrown to the ground in a matter of seconds. The key problem was that he did not have a starship with him. If he still had the First Fleet, he would have attacked them long ago. Furthermore, this supply ship did not have any weapon systems. Moreover, there were so many injured people around the factory. He could not bring himself to give up on these Trants and take off the starship. It was not that he was a great man. The major sects and clans in the Godly War Star Zone all had an unwritten rule that when they captured the wounded, the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled, regardless of whether they were allies or enemies, they would provide humanitarian aid. They would not act recklessly like the space pirates. Sun Kong and Yang Wei saving people on Madison was a typical example. Therefore, under normal circumstances, many sects and clans would try their best not to disturb Madison. If they could help when they passed by, they would. If they could not, they would just leave and not cause any trouble. Although the Green Tree Clan was an outsider clan, if you abandoned the poor and left them to die, how would others view you when the news spread to the 6 great sects? Therefore, it was not that easy to be a commander. It was not a glorious position where one could command a fleet and kill everyone. The two of them discussed for a while, but still had no clue. Ding Ming said, "Forget it. Let's go to the medical area first." The medical cabins on the supply ship were more advanced. Usually, the seriously ill and severely injured in the fleet would be sent to the supply ship for treatment. The medical area was similar to the induction hall. There were different types of medical cabins and equipment embedded in the surrounding walls. However, Ling Yan's body was too big and could not fit in at all. It could only be placed on the ground. At this moment, Junling, Spiritual Sword, and Nicole surrounded the corpse. Ling Yan's fatal injury was a bone spike that had pierced through her back and pierced through her heart. This stab was vicious. The old man who assassinated her should be a mid-level war supremacy. He had attached his origin energy to the bone spike. When the bone spike pierced through the heart, the origin energy on it rapidly expanded. How could a normal person's heart withstand it? It immediately exploded in the chest. How could such a fatal injury be saved? Spiritual Sword did not care about his identity as a prince. He decisively bowed in front of Nicole. "May I ask if the sacred spirit can revive her?" Nicole nodded. "During the Gray ceremony, the tree god told me the method. It is possible to revive her, but I cannot revive her." No one understood this, so Spiritual Sword could only bow again. "May I ask Miss Nicole for guidance?" Nicole was now completely surrounded by this ball of green light. She helplessly spread out her hands. The sacred spirit is not currently fused with my body. It is only temporarily relying on me. I can feel the majestic power of the sacred spirit, but I cannot bear it. Actually, Ding Meng had always been curious about this point. Before he had become an origin energy user, the Grand Prosperity Kingdom's sacred spirit also had this kind of gentle fluctuation. He could feel it from far away. It was just so miraculous. Under its protection, all diseases and pain would slowly be expelled. After he became an origin energy user, he discovered that the sacred spirit's fluctuation was not strong. Using Xiao AI's point of view, it was an energy carrier. It could accommodate many different types of energy. The ball of energy in Nicole's body seemed to be an unknown green bioenergy. But the question was, how did the sacred spirit absorb this bioenergy? Was it because it was a super life form? At this time, Nicole explained, I cannot bear it because I'm not a psionicist. My body cannot contain such a large amount of energy. Spirit Sword said, Miss Nicole, do you mean that we only need one psionicist? That's not it either. The light bird flapped its wings and drilled out of Junling's pocket. What she means is that to use the sacred spirit to restore a spirit body, not only does it need a person who can bear this energy, but it also needs a medium that can effectively restore vitality. Nicole nodded. Yes, it is very correct. Spiritual Sword was confused again. He did not understand these technical terms, so he directly asked, How can I revive my sister? The light bird replied decisively, You must rely on me to revive her. You? Spiritual Sword was shocked. Ding Meng was also surprised. You can do it? The light bird laughed. Did you think that you were the only ones who received the tree god's telepathic message? Actually, I also received it. Don't forget, my fourth form brings vitality and revival. Moreover, I'm a strange life form. Although I'm not as high level as it, I can also restore life forms that are lower level than me. Spiritual Sword immediately turned to look at Nicole. Is that so? Nicole nodded seriously. Yes, it is the same as me. It has been entrusted by the god. Spiritual Sword bowed and said, Then please do it, Miss Nicole. Nicole did not say anything more. Standing in place, she closed her eyes and muttered something. This time, Ding Meng and the others could not understand, because she seemed to be chanting some kind of ancient spell. Spiritual Sword was surprised again. Is this the Green Tree Royal Family's blue incantation? Junling said, What is that? Spiritual Sword smiled bitterly. I have only heard of it. This is a secret passed down by the gods. It is said that it is a supreme, purifying power. Only the purest people of my family can have it. I did not expect the tree god to pass it down to Miss Nicole. At this time, the halo on Nicole's body began to rotate, and the green energy seemed to become hazy. In the halo, she was like a saintess who had descended. The whole medical hall was filled with green light, as if it was an illusion. Ding Meng noticed that the Holy Spirit imperceptibly emitted a large amount of gentle energy, and then the body of the light bird also turned green. The light bird immediately circled above Ling Yun's corpse, and a wonderful scene appeared. With every flap of its wings, there was immediately a silk-like green spiritual current flowing into the corpse, and there seemed to be leaf-like luminous objects responding to it. Looking carefully, it was the colorful spiritual leaves that the tree god had injected into her body. There were about 20 of them, and they were protecting the heart. This recovery process took quite a long time. Nicole had been chanting nonstop, and the light bird had been flying around tirelessly. After about an hour, the light bird seemed to have run out of energy. Its flapping speed had obviously slowed down. After flapping a few times, it fell down with a plop sound. It was paralyzed on the steel plate, unconscious. Junling hurriedly picked up the light bird. Xiao AI said in a low voice, This guy has not recovered since coming out of Madison. Now, it has overused its energy. It'll take a long time for the fourth form to truly take shape. At the same time, the corpse lying on the ground clearly showed signs of life. Ling Yan's pair of big cat eyes slowly opened. Ling Jian was overjoyed and hurriedly went forward to support her. Kartika was dumbstruck instead. This wasn't using an artificial body to carry a spirit. and it was a true resurrection. Exactly how many divine techniques does the Green Tree clan possess that the Divine War Starfield doesn't possess? Lingyan appeared to be very calm. She was not too surprised, nor was she too impulsive. She just slowly stood up, lowered her head to look at Dingmeng, and sincerely said slowly, "Thank you." In the process of resurrection, the light bird also used telepathy to transmit information. She now knew everything that had happened during this period. Ling Yun then faced Nicole, bowed, and said, "Miss Nicole, thank you very much." Nicole smiled but did not reply. As a citizen of the poorest tribe in the Green Tree tribe, to be able to receive the gratitude of the royal princess was already enough for her. Ling Yun looked at Nicole, who was wrapped in holy light, and her tone became serious again. "Miss Nicole, the Holy Spirit is now in your body, and the burden of restoring our tribe has also fallen on your shoulders. Therefore, you must not have any mishaps now." After all, she was the wise one of the Green Tree tribe, and her thoughts were quite clear. She immediately saw the core problem of the current situation. Kartika immediately went forward and said, "Please rest assured, I will do my best to take care of all the trans who are taking refuge near the factory. As for Miss Nicole's safety, with me around, Jian will definitely not be able to harm her." Ling Yun's eyes flashed. "This human officer, thank you very much for everything you have done for my people. You are very different from them." Ding Meng muttered, "The problem is that it is not a good idea for us to be stationed here. The two priests will definitely come looking for us." Ling Yun nodded and said, "That's right, we should take the initiative to attack, and not passively take a beating." Although that was what she said, everyone knew that the combat power around the factory was very weak, and they did not have the qualifications to take the initiative to attack at all. Kartika said, "In the end, it is still Ji Yin. This guy is very crafty and cunning. I really don't understand why your father chose to believe him and not you." Chapter 449. Ling Yun's eyes flashed. This is a long story. It's mainly because of the two high priests. Ling Jian took the initiative to explain. The two high priests have assisted 5 generations of monarchs and have a high reputation. The monarchs also trusted them very much and almost listened to everything they said. Kartika hesitated and said, "Are you saying that their choice to cooperate with the Blue Light Group was mainly because of the two high priests?" Ling Jian nodded. "More or less. The two high priests advocated learning the technology of the God War Starfield to improve the appearance of our race." Kartika sighed. "I've heard of this before. However, forgive me for being blunt. Even if you get these so-called starships, quantum, ion, cabin, crystal sources, and pulse technology, Planet 36 doesn't have the conditions to produce them. At the very least, you don't have professional factories, assembly lines, intelligent machinery, and basic industrial facilities." Ling Yin said, "I agree with this officer's view. This is just like our race. We are originally an ecological civilization and don't match their mechanical civilization at all." Ding Meng pondered and said, "It's impossible that the two high priests don't understand this logic. Since they understand, they still chose to cooperate. I'm afraid there's another reason behind this." Kartika said, "Jian definitely knows this reason. The root of all this was caused by the Blue Light Group. When the first fleet arrived at Planet 36, it was our Long Voyage Alliance's fleet. The higher-ups of our alliance have always advocated for peaceful coexistence with the Green Tree race. Later, under the interference of other factions, the Blue Light Group and the Green Tree race started to negotiate." Jun Ling suddenly said, "Can't we just get rid of this Ji Yin directly? What was the point of analyzing the past and the future? Couldn't they just crush and eliminate him directly?" This was a very effective method. It had to be said that this was a good idea. It was simple, crude, direct, and effective. However, Kartika smiled bitterly and said, "Miss June, Jian's strength is not weak. Moreover, you should have seen that his fleet is quite large. We can't deal with it at all unless the tree god appears again. Besides, Jian is not alone. His subordinates are also quite strong. He is not the kind of person that you can kill just because you want to." Ding Meng suddenly said, "Where should this Ji Yin be now? Kartika was stunned. What do you want to do? Don't be rash. Ding Meng said, I think what she said is a good idea. Your fleet will arrive here in about 10 days, and the two priestesses will definitely take action. The factory is completely paralyzed now, and all the signs indicate that we are now in a very disadvantageous situation. Instead of waiting for death, we might as well take the risk. Kadika was surprised. Brother Ding, Jian is a martial artist, and his level is not low either. He is at least level 8 and above. If I were to fight him, although he might not be able to defeat me, I do not have the confidence to defeat him either. In the Godly War Starfield, the ranking system was even more detailed than that of the Federal Empire. In between each major rank, there were 10 sub-ranks. Martial artists were combat masters, and level 8 martial artists were advanced combat masters. Furthermore, there were combat masters that were about to become generals. Ding Meng did not view a single combat master as a threat. However, if there were 3 or 5 of them working together, they would be a force to be reckoned with. Xiao AI had already discovered that even the ordinary soldiers of the Alliance were equipped with combat armor. If Ji Yin and the others were equipped with combat armor as well, they would be at least as strong as a battle saint, if not stronger. Furthermore, they were currently in a cooperative relationship with the Green Tree tribe, so they could not ignore the existence of the two priestesses. Ding Meng was silent for a long time before saying, I only have one problem now, and that is that the fleet on the other side has already landed. The entire Divine Forest is definitely under the surveillance of quantum detectors. The slightest movement will definitely be discovered. At least for now, the prototype will not be able to fly over. Kadika understood what he meant. The fleet's radar could scan all mechanical units on Planet 36 that had a crystal energy system. The moment the supply ship took off or the individual armor was activated, they would be immediately locked onto by the enemy. There was nowhere to hide, so flying over or using airdrops was not feasible. However, charging in alone was even more unfeasible. The Divine Forest was currently filled with Green Tree Tribe soldiers and Alliance soldiers. Charging in rashly would easily alert the enemy. Kadika sighed. I'm almost certain that Ji Yin is definitely at the core of the Divine Tree in the middle of the forest. He's not too far from here. If we were on the mothership, it would really be difficult for us to even get close to him. Ling Yun said, Mr. Ting, I have a way to send someone near the palace without alerting anyone or being detected by the starship's radar. The prerequisite is that I can only send one person over. Oh, Ding Meng was a little surprised. What is it? Ling Yun extended her hand and said, Please follow me outside. The supply ship was parked on a patch of grass beside the river. Ling Yun slowly walked over to the riverside and took out a 5-colored spirit leaf. She placed it by her mouth and gently blew into it. The melody was gentle and beautiful, giving one the feeling of traveling through the night sky. It was very pleasant to the ears. Nicole immediately revealed an envious look. The Green Tree tribe was not proficient in music, but music was one of the important languages used by the ants to communicate with the other species on Planet 36. Thus, the status of the musicians of the Green Tree tribe was very high, and the royal orchestra was especially respected. As a princess, Ling Yin naturally had a deep understanding of music. After playing the melody for a while, a strong wind suddenly surged in the night sky. It was as if something was descending to the ground. The surrounding people cheered. Ding Meng focused his gaze and saw a huge flying dragon slowly flying towards Ling Yin. This flying dragon was different from the group of flying dragons that Ding Meng and the others had seen on the starship. Its wingspan was over 30 meters, and its entire body had a round and brilliant green luster. Its head was like an owl's, and its eyes were like pupils that constantly changed colors. There was also a pair of slightly smaller wingspan at its tail. It was just like an airplane. It landed on the grass and stood there quietly, giving off a majestic and domineering aura. The surrounding people had already started to kneel on one knee and worship it from afar. Ding Meng thought to himself, could this be the king of the flying dragons? Sure enough, Ling Yin was already explaining. The leader of the Dragon Knights, Iranka, is a friend of my tribe. Whenever my tribe's people are in trouble, it will always help us. Ling Yun gently stroked Iranka's wings, as if communicating with it. After a long time, Iranka turned its head to look at Ding Ming. Its pair of pupils turned green, and a low roar came from its throat. Ling Yun turned around and said, Iranka's lifespan is over 3,000 years, and it grew up under the grace of the tree god. The radars on human starships are unable to detect it. Ding Ming realized that the aura of this flying dragon was very similar to that of a super life form. The starships were unable to detect the true situation within the divine forest because the super life form had a shielding effect. It was probably the same principle for this flying dragon to be able to block the radars. Ling Yun gave some instructions to the flying dragon before saying, Mr. Ding Ming, it is willing to carry you to the divine forest and drop you near the palace. It will depend on whether you can stand on its back. Ding Ming nodded and slowly approached the flying dragon. Then, he jumped and stood on the flying dragon's back. There was a small flat area on the top of the flying dragon's back. To be honest, it was very difficult to stand on this table and fly. However, Ding Ming had telekinesis and could cast telekinetic waves to fix himself on the flying dragon's back. The moment he released his telekinesis, the flying dragon seemed to have felt this invisible force. It suddenly spread its wings and rose into the sky like an attack aircraft. The wind caused by the wings was so strong that everyone could not open their eyes. When their vision returned to normal, the flying dragon had already disappeared into the depths of the night sky. The flying dragon's speed was extremely fast, and it could be said that it was not inferior to the prototype. Ding Ming had never felt like he was riding the clouds. It was as if he had grown a pair of wings and was flying at high speed. At the same time, he realized that while the flying dragon was flying, its wings and skin were constantly changing color, mimicking the surrounding environment. It had completely merged into one with the night sky. Ding Ming thought that even with his telekinesis vision, he would not be able to discover it on the ground. Gradually, the city of Murtaja appeared in their vision. At this moment, the city was brightly lit. The main starships of the Second Fleet were docked by the sea. Many transport ships, flying units, and engineering vehicles were all driven into the city. The lights on them lit up the entire city as bright as day. There were not many members of the Green Tree tribe in the city. These Ents seemed to have been chased into the forest. The streets were filled with large and small mechanical units and Alliance soldiers. Near the bottom of the green tree in the center of the city, there were 12 holes with a diameter of 20 meters. These must be the mines dug by the drilling robots. He did not expect Ji Yin to be so efficient. He had already started to excavate the mines in such a short time. Human, where do you want to land? A deep voice suddenly sounded in Ding Ming's mind. Ding Ming was shocked. It's you? The flying dragon was clearly communicating with him through telekinesis. Don't be surprised. I noticed that you're a warlock. Naturally, I can communicate with you without hindrance. Ding Ming was curious. You know the human language too? The flying dragon calmly replied. I know more than 30 languages of different races. Your human language is relatively simple in comparison. Ding Ming hesitated. I can sense a very strong aura of the tree god on you. The flying dragon said, That's right. I have always relied on the green tree divine fruit that the tree god gave me to survive. I promised it to protect the green tree tribe. However, the situation is not good. Once the central tree is destroyed, the source of all life in the divine forest will lose its divine power. When that happens, everything below will become a land of death. Not only will the green tree tribe perish, but the other creatures will also perish. Ding Ming asked, What can I do? The flying dragon said, I hope that you can go underground and stop them from digging. Ding Ming said in a low voice, Then fly to the center of the tree and throw me down. There was a hint of admiration in the flying dragon's voice. You have a good eye. The flying dragon was too big. If he flew too low, he would be discovered. It was also not safe to land near the palace. The safest place was inside the divine tree. The leaves were lush, and it was not easy to be discovered. At the same time, it was the easiest place to enter the mines. Chapter 450. Looking down from the sky, one could see drilling machines rising from the 12 holes on the ground. Alloy containers were placed neatly on the surface of the fan. They were probably the superconducting ores that had been excavated and transported up. Then, the engineering vehicles would take them away and drive them to the transport ships outside the city. Ding Ming secretly used his telekinesis vision. The situation underground really surprised him. The mining area of the Black Gold base was already big enough, but the scale of the mining area in front of him was so huge that it made him speechless. The roots of the sacred tree were too huge. Normally, the scale of the roots was 2 to 3 times larger than the tree on the ground. The height of the sacred tree was more than 3,000 meters. It was not hard to imagine how spectacular the intertwined roots were underground. It was not inferior to a large starship. The excavation plan of the War of Gods Alliance was obviously carefully designed. The intelligent robots first dug about 100 meters down vertically, then spread out horizontally for 500 meters. Then, they slowly spread out diagonally, forming a sphere to encircle the roots. Finally, they dug towards the core of the sacred tree. The purpose of digging like this was to prevent the sacred tree from collapsing. If the sacred tree collapsed, not only would the city of Murtaja be smashed into ashes, but more than half of the forest would also collapse. No one on the ground would be spared. Ding Ming was not in a hurry to go down. After scanning the structure of the underground mining area, he began to observe the surroundings. "I suggest we start from the ground first," Xiao AI suddenly said. "The person who can design this excavation plan is definitely an expert in this field. How could ordinary soldiers think of this?" Ding Ming said, "Find this expert first?" Xiao AI said, "Not really. Finding this expert will be like finding a needle in a haystack. But for such a huge project, there must be a special command center and real-time control station. These facilities can't be underground. They must be on the ground, and they must be nearby. I just scanned the area, and there are no large starships nearby. There are only a few transport ships outside the capital. You should search the ground first and see if you can find any clues." Ding Ming's telekinetic vision spread out again. His gaze landed on the palace below. "There's no need to search. There's definitely something going on there." The square of the palace had been blown to smithereens by Ding Ming, but the palace itself was still intact. Now, a group of fully armed soldiers had been stationed there. With his telekinetic vision, he could clearly see that a spacious room in the southeast corner of the first-floor hall had been transformed into something similar to the command center of a starship. The main control console could not be installed in this room, so it was replaced by a medium-sized photon processor. The holographic projection generated by the photon processor was a three-dimensional map of the mining area. The map was not complete because the lines were slowly moving downward. It was obvious that the excavation work was in full swing. A group of workers surrounded the map and pointed at it, seemingly discussing the progress of the excavation. After Ding Ming scanned it carefully for a while, Xiao AI said, "Okay, I have recorded all the data. We can go now. Don't be in such a hurry." Ding Ming's gaze landed on the second floor of the palace. The Alliance soldiers did not enter the second floor because the first floor was vacated by the Green Tree tribe. The second and third floors were the residences of the royalty and nobles. What was strange was that the king and the 2 priests were not there. Only 5 or 6 nobles were holed up in the various large rooms. These people's expressions were fearful and uneasy, but only one family lived on the 3rd floor. Since the 2 priests were not there, Ding Ming's telekinetic vision was like a no-man's land. It traveled freely within the palace, observing every movement clearly. This was especially true for this standard family of 3. Judging from the decorations of the room and the way they dressed, this family's status in the Green Tree tribe was definitely not low. The man kept pacing back and forth in the room, looking like he had a lot on his mind. The woman sat at the head of the bed with a worried look on her face. These 2 were obviously husband and wife, because there was a short female ant in the corner of the room. She should be the couple's daughter. Her parents were gloomy, but the daughter had a blank look on her face. "Dad, why are there 12 holes around the tree of God?" The child was young and ignorant, but it did not mean that the parents did not know. The woman's tone was very worried. Tang Chung, did these humans go under the tree of God? The man called Tang Chung was still pacing back and forth, ignoring her. The woman continued. This has never happened in the once-in-a-decade worship ceremony. Now that the king wants to work with the alliance of gods, I feel like the king is going against the will of the gods. Tang Chung was a little impatient. What does a woman like you know? If you don't know, don't talk nonsense. There are people from the alliance everywhere. It won't be good if they hear you. The woman was even more worried. You also know that the situation is not good. Princess Ling Yun has already been killed. Why don't you persuade the king? Tang Chung frowned. No one can persuade him. He listens to the priests. He might have already gone down. The woman said, they went down too? With those humans? Tang Chung said, what else? Where do you think they can go? Ding Ming thought to himself. Did the king and the others go down to the mining area too? The woman said, are they going to check out the ore? I heard the priest say that the ore is very valuable. They can sell it to the alliance. The alliance will exchange a lot of resources for it. Is that right? The daughter ran over excitedly. Father, the chocolate of the humans is very delicious. Can we exchange it for chocolate? Tang Chung was annoyed by the mother and daughter's questions. He looked around and lowered his voice. I suspect that they are not digging for the ore. Their real purpose is to look for the temple. Not only was the woman confused, but even Ding Ming was confused. Wasn't the temple on the roof of the palace? Could it be that there was another temple? Fortunately, Tang Chung was already explaining the divine temple above our heads is used to preserve the Holy Spirit. Aside from protecting us, the Holy Spirit also has another important function. It can communicate with the tree god. We can only see the tree god once every 10 years because the tree god isn't in the divine temple. The woman was shocked. There's another temple? Tang Chung nodded. The real temple is actually underground. Legend has it that as long as you find the real temple and open the door to the temple, you can obtain eternal life. The woman was suspicious. Who did you hear this from? Tang Chung sighed deeply. The previous monarch accidentally revealed this to me when he was drunk. You mustn't tell anyone else. The woman was stunned for a moment before continuing to ask, but how did the king and priests know about this? Tang Chung sighed even harder. I can only tell you that because of this big secret, the previous king's mysterious death was definitely related to the two priests. The woman was stunned. You're saying that the two priests conspired to kill the previous king? Shoo! Tang Chung was frightened and quickly interrupted her. Keep your voice down. Some things can't be said carelessly. If it reaches the priest's ears, our family will definitely die. This news was too shocking, and the woman was indeed frightened. Perhaps Princess Ling Yun was also killed because of this secret. Tang Chung sighed. After all, the princess is the new king recognized by the tree god. Now that the new king is dead, it depends on when Prince Ling Jian can return. Hearing this, Ding Ming almost instantly understood the ins and outs of the matter. This secret of the Green Tree clan should have been passed down from generation to generation, but only the kings knew about it. However, this secret was inadvertently known by the two priests, and the priests definitely had their own selfish motives. With the reverence of the entire Green Tree clan toward the gods, it was impossible for them to touch the tree god. Even if they had the guts, they didn't have the ability to excavate such a huge underground mine. Therefore, they had to rely on external forces, and this external force was the God War Alliance. With the technology of the Alliance, excavating this mine was child's play. Xiao AI said, my personal preliminary judgment is that the king, Ling Yun, and Ling Jian should not know about this. Ding Ming said in a deep voice, I'm afraid that Ji Yin himself doesn't know that he is being used by the two priests. This analysis was reasonable. If Ji Yin knew about something like immortality, why would he cooperate with them? He would have come knocking on their door a long time ago. However, the method of the two priests was really ingenious. They persuaded the king to cooperate with the alliance, using wood to exchange for supplies. They calculated that Ling Yun would interfere sooner or later, and the quality of the wood would decline year by year. The alliance would definitely send people to negotiate every year. The people from the Green Tree clan who went to negotiate should be the two priests. The results of a negotiation would get worse and worse, and sooner or later, the alliance would be forced to use force. If the alliance wanted to use force, they had to go through the tree god. It must be the priests who informed the blue light group of the specific time of the worship ceremony, and Ji Yin chose to make his move on this day. Kataga's first fleet was used as cannon fodder. If the first fleet fought against the tree god's energy would be depleted. At this time, Ji Yan's second fleet would be able to move freely. When the alliance's army arrived, it would be difficult for the king not to cooperate fully. Of course, these plans to murder Ling Yun were all within the priest's calculations. The only thing that happened was that Kataga escaped. Halfway through, Ding Ming's group appeared and snatched the Holy Spirit away. But so what? Now that the mining area was being excavated, all the plans were being carried out according to the will of the two priests. After understanding all this, Ding Ming could not help but sigh. Sometimes, desire was enough to drive anyone crazy. The plan of the two priests completely ignored their own kind. As for things like immortality, Ding Ming definitely did not believe in them. Xiao AI also expressed her agreement. In this universe, even the divine-level experts from the most advanced civilizations will fall in the face of time. No species can achieve immortality. Ding Ming nodded. Let's go down and take a look. What exactly are they looking for? Chapter 451. The mining area under the sacred tree was completely different from the mining area in the black gold base. The black gold base was dark, damp, and gloomy, but this mining area was like an interconnected passage inside a starship. All the excavated spaces were installed with alloy steel plates and intelligent light sources, and countless robots were shuttling back and forth. These passages were also very particular. They did not damage the roots and branches of the tree at all. Wherever the roots and branches passed through, the passages would wrap around them in the form of rooms, which played a very good role in fixing the roots and branches, so that the trees on the ground would not lose their support and collapse during the excavation process. Ding Ming's method of entering the mining area was very simple. He directly rode the drilling robot's fan-shaped plane and swaggered through the passages of the mining area. Along the way, many soldiers saw Ding Ming, but these people did not take any action because everyone felt that Ding Ming looked very familiar, but they just could not remember who he was. Just as these people were racking their brains to recall, Ding Ming passed by them. This was another psychological effect of the assimilation art. By interfering with the minds of the people around him through telekinetic waves, the moment the other party saw him, they would have a short selective amnesia, thus ignoring his existence. Compared to sneaking in, this method was much safer. After all, this place was not the black gold base. It was almost impossible to perfectly avoid the sight of all the soldiers with origin ability. The advantage of this psychological effect compared to Terminator was that it did not consume a lot of telekinesis like Terminator, and the area it needed to cover was relatively small. This kind of narrow passage was most suitable for use, and ordinary origin ability users would not be able to detect it at all. However, Ding Ming was now acting based on the map that he had peeked from the first floor of the palace. He was not sure whether the two high priests were underground. If they were, it was very likely that the two high priests would sense his telekinesis spreading over a large area. The telekinesis of the two high priests was not weak either. Although they were of different types, telekinesis was, after all, a space string. Once they met, even the slightest movement of the wind and grass would inevitably alert the other party. The excavation speed of the Sacred War Alliance was extremely fast. At the forefront, there were intelligent probes drilling holes, transporting ores, spraying metal mixtures, installing alloy steel plates, and quickly condensing passages. The more he went down, the more the terrain slowly changed. There were fewer passages, but more and more metal halls appeared one after another. These halls were a bit like material warehouses. Each hall was divided into several floors, separated by simple steel frames. The ores and tools were piled up on the steel frames, waiting for the soldiers behind to transport or replace them. Xiao AI sighed. The Alliance really came prepared. These tools are really complete. Dingmeng thought for a moment. It was a bit inappropriate to swagger through the city like this. While there was no one around, he simply took out the 1,000 shadow foil and stuck it on his face, casually changing into the appearance of a soldier of the Sacred War Alliance, and then continued to go down. Dingmeng was definitely an authoritative expert in the knowledge of the mining area. After going down for a long time, as he expected, a central hall full of technological aura finally appeared. In the east, west, and north of the hall, there were identical giant passages. Conveyor belts were installed in the passages, constantly transporting mud and waste. They must have dug to the bottom. They could no longer use probes to drill brainlessly. They had to dig manually. In this hall, there were not only human soldiers in uniforms, but also tree men with professional tools. This situation was a bit like the mining area on Cyprus Ancient Star, where people and snakes mixed together and were extremely noisy. There was a 5-story building in the center of the hall, which could be said to be a hall within a hall. Dingmeng also knew that there was a great risk in using telekinesis at this time and place, but he had no choice but to use it. After releasing dozens of micro-dots, the situation inside the 5-story building was panoramic. The hall on the 5th floor was the real-time command center. A large group of people were discussing the map model generated by the photon computer. According to Kataga's description, Dingmeng could be 100% sure that this group of people was Ji Yin and his group of direct subordinates. However, he still did not find the king and the priest. Fortunately, the 2 priests were not here, otherwise, the possibility of being exposed would be very high. Kataga had also repeatedly warned him not to underestimate Ji Yan's group of people. Their combat power could not be underestimated. Dingmeng still decided to go to the North Passage. The scene of humans and tree men mining together was not only strange, but also spectacular. Tens of thousands of people were going side by side from countless branching passages. There was no doubt that they were looking for something. Dingmeng's strategy this time was not to work with tools or to join a team. He slowly walked in the depths of the cave, controlling his telekinesis vision within the cave. Thousands of telekinesis micro-dots were constantly scanning the crowd like reconnaissance aircraft. Under normal circumstances, miners were more focused on their work. They would either dig with their excavators or stop to rest when they were tired. Those who had worked in the mining area for a long time would have a unique vision. As long as they looked at the place, they would be able to tell whether or not the people here were working seriously. Were the mining efficiency high? Were those people really tired? With just a glance, they had an idea. Dingmeng wandered around the cave. He was not in a hurry. There were many things that could not be rushed. He had to wait patiently. After 14 batches of miners went in and out, Dingmeng's eyes locked onto a tree man. This tree man was not very conspicuous, but the aura on his body was unusual. In Dingmeng's perception, this aura was faintly discernible, just like how a person breathed. When he inhaled, it was normal. He looked like an ordinary tree man. However, when he exhaled, it contained a kind of agile and changeable energy. Moreover, he exhaled very carefully, afraid of disturbing the people around him. This person was obviously trying his best to hide his aura. Only Dingmeng, who had a deep foundation and an experienced eye, could tell that there was something wrong with this person. If it were anyone else, they would not have been able to tell. The tree man walked into the crowd. He seemed to be greeting his companions, but after a few rounds, he disappeared. Dingmeng narrowed his telekinesis vision again and followed him. He found a crack in a wall in front of him. Without any hesitation, he immediately went into it. Inside the crack was a narrow passage that had been artificially excavated. The mud, sand, soil, and stones had not been moved away in time. However, from the analysis of the residue, it was mostly hard and coarse rocks. It created an illusion that nothing could be excavated from this path. Thinking back to when Dingmeng and Little Four discovered the underground worship of the Black Gold Base, they had explored in this kind of environment. Sometimes, the more you thought it was impossible, the more likely it was to be a path. The passageway was completely irregular and twisted, and it slowly extended underground. This distance was also quite long, but as they walked, a spherical boulder completely blocked the passageway. This was a typical dead end. Ding-Meng looked at the 5-meter-tall boulder and could not help but smile. He took a few steps back, slowly raised his right hand, opened his palm, and gently pulled. The boulder immediately rolled out like a rubber ball, revealing a dark hole inside. After Ding-Meng went in, he used the same method to pull the boulder back. The entire passage looked as good as it had been before. This kind of obstacle could only stop ordinary people for a while. It was impossible to fool experts. As they continued forward, the passage gradually became wider, and the terrain gradually widened. Soon, a huge pool appeared in front of them. There was indeed something wrong with this underground place. Ding-Meng did not think too much and jumped into the pool. The underwater world was truly a different world. When he dove into the water, he immediately realized that the underwater world was so vast that it was beyond his imagination. It felt like a huge underground building, but this building had been submerged by water. He was now moving inside this building. The space was so big. There were so many passages, so many walls, and so many branches. It was like a huge maze. Ding-Meng believed that the tree man in front of him must have also dived down. The green tree tribe was good at moving underwater. Xiao AI said, "The water contains strong toxins and is very corrosive. Even alloy made with 98 yuan can't resist it for a long time." The surrounding walls seem to be made of wood. The strange thing is that there are no gaps between the walls. It's like a huge piece of wood was carved from the inside. In fact, Ding-Meng had also noticed that the walls were indeed made of wood. He approached a corner, raised his wrist, and waved the detector at the wall. After 2 crisp beeps, the watch displayed a super high score of 0.98. This was probably the best wood of the green tree tribe. Xiao AI said, "I'm thinking that we've probably entered the core of the green tree tribe." Ding-Meng said, "The thing that the Alliance really wants is probably this kind of wood. But what can it be used for?" Xiao AI's tone became cold. "In here, I'm afraid that technological signals will be blocked. The toxins will surge violently and form a natural enclosed space. If I'm not wrong, I'm afraid that even your catoptric deflection won't be able to pierce through this wood." Oh, Ding-Meng did not believe that there was something that couldn't be pierced through with kryptonite. There was a flash of light under the water. The catoptric deflection automatically detached from his belt and turned into a sharp spike. Driven by telekinesis, it stabbed into the wall with a thud. A jaw-dropping scene happened. The wall was not pierced through. It only left a slight dent, but the dent recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ding-Meng was shocked. "What kind of material is this?" Xiao AI said, "There's no comparison sample in the database, but Zun Kong will probably go crazy if he sees this kind of wood. If he uses this material to make a bone armor, it will be truly invulnerable to fire and water." Ding-Meng recalled the catoptric deflection and continued to sneak forward. When they reached a depth of 200 meters, Xiao AI finally reported, "There's an unknown unit 800 meters ahead. It looks like a human, but it doesn't look like a human." Without another word, Ding-Meng rushed forward with all his might. Soon, the two of them saw clearly that in the middle of a crossroad, there was a tall person staring at them coldly. No matter how much they thought about it, they would never have thought that this person was actually the monarch. Chapter 452. The monarch was floating in the water, his eyes staring straight at Ding-Meng in the tunnel. It was as if he had long known that Ding-Meng would track him down here. The scene in the dark and silent water was really creepy. However, Ding-Meng calmed down and slowly swam over. The monarch was still floating in the air, motionless. When they were less than 3 meters apart, Xiao AI sighed and said, "No wonder it's an unknown unit. It turns out that he's completely dead." Ding-Meng also observed carefully. The monarch had obviously been dead for some time. His golden skin had already turned white from being soaked in the poisonous water. He was just maintaining this posture of death. His cat eyes were not closed. From his gaze before he died, there was a mixture of shock, anger, and annoyance in his eyes. It was as if he could not believe that he had been killed. Xiao AI said, "There aren't many people who can kill him. It might be the work of 2 priests." "It's very possible." Ding Ming nodded. "He has no external injuries, and there are no signs of fight on his body. Can you test his cause of death?" Xiao AI sighed and said, "My test results show that he was poisoned to death." Ding Ming said in surprise, "The monarch of the Green Tree Tribe can be poisoned to death." Xiao AI said, "An unknown harmful chemical was detected in his blood. Although there's no sample for comparison, I've seen the principle of the toxin before. It's the strange toxin that Shui Yin and the others were inflicted with on planet V4. The toxin wasn't suddenly injected into his body. Instead, it had been lurking in his blood for a very long time. After accumulating for a long time, it slowly mutated and completely corroded his organs. He might not have noticed it himself." Ding Ming muttered, "In that case, it's very likely that he was murdered by his own people." Xiao AI said, "You should be able to tell if you pierce his skin." Ding Ming summoned his catoptric deflection again. The tip of the sword gently slid across the monarch's bare arm. A stream of dark green blood immediately spurted out from the wound. The blood spread in the water and turned black after a while. It was highly toxic. Moreover, the black poison seemed to be able to burn the water with a sizzling sound. The blood and water turned into a string of bubbles and rose up. Looking at the corpse, Ding Ming fell silent. He still felt some sympathy for the monarch. Although the monarch had secretly ordered the guards to assassinate Ling Yun, and although this method was not desirable, the monarch's starting point was to make plans for the future of the Green Tree Tribe. Who would have thought that he would become a pawn in someone else's hands and die tragically in this dark underground? If Ling Yun knew all of this, how would she feel? Xiao AI said, "Since the monarch's corpse is here, then we are not far from the Treant." Ding Ming nodded and continued to move forward. This time, he used his origin ability and sunk to the bottom of the pool, moving forward by running. At such a deep pool, the water pressure was no less than a mountain pressing down on him. Ding Ming's running speed would definitely be greatly reduced. Just running like this took him more than 40 minutes before he reached the edge. He reckoned that he was probably at the edge of the pool. Only then did Ding Ming begin to struggle upward. Xiao AI said, "I did a rough calculation. The length of this pool is more than 10,000 meters. The width is more than 3,000 meters, and the height is more than 20,000 meters. We should be at least 35,000 meters below the surface of Planet 36. At this time, the surface of the water could finally be seen with the naked eye. Ding Ming dived out without hesitation. The moment he dived out, Ding Ming did not have time to see his surroundings clearly. He immediately felt a very strange fluctuation. This was not a fluctuation of origin ability, but rather an aura similar to biological energy, just like the aura of a super life form. However, super life forms gave off a natural, gentle, and vigorous aura, while this aura gave off a unique, evil, and treacherous feeling. If one could describe it, it was as if all of one's evil thoughts had been aroused, creating endless curiosity and even causing one's heartbeat to accelerate. Xiao AI decisively said, "Focus your mind and activate your telekinesis vision. Use the assimilation art to stabilize your emotions." The psychological effects of the assimilation art could also be used on him. It could make his mind clearer, his thoughts clearer, and his willpower firmer. It was the best psychic technique to deal with all kinds of infectious telekinesis. Sure enough, the telekinesis nourished him, and that strange feeling was suppressed. His heartbeat slowly returned to normal, and Ding Ming's emotions also calmed down. As his vision expanded, the scene in front of him deeply shocked him. Ding Ming did not know how many strange things he had experienced, but none of them could be compared to this. This was a completely sealed space. It was not accurate to describe it as a room or a cave, because the walls of this space were all made of top-grade wood. It was a 360-degree cylinder. How big was it? It could be said that it was about the same size as the Blue Moon branch building of the Starlight Corporation. It was estimated to be more than 1,000 meters tall. At the very bottom was a super spacious plaza. There were 7 azure wood divine trees standing in different directions on the 4 walls of the plaza. These 7 trees were not real trees, and they were also made of bright yellow wood. It was just that they were too lifelike, as if they were real trees. Logically speaking, these 7 trees were a little out of place because this space was cylindrical, so 8 trees should have formed a circle. If this space could be compared to a clock, then only the 12 o'clock position did not have any divine trees. Instead, there was a majestic door at the bottom. The door was definitely made of wood, but it was engraved with many complicated and profound patterns and symbols. Dingming definitely did not recognize these symbols, but these symbols were all in the shape of various trees. There were branches, trunks, leaves, roots, fruits. They intertwined together to form an exquisite, complicated, and mysterious picture scroll on the door. This was definitely the real temple of the Azurewood tribe, and that door was definitely the door of the temple. He did not expect the legend to be true. Dingming was at the top of the divine tree at the 6 o'clock position. He had just emerged from a pool of about 20 square meters, and this pool was only a leaf on the divine tree. One could imagine how big this temple was. Dingming did not make a sound. He hid in the tree and quietly observed the movements below. Not only were the 2 high priests in the center of the plaza, but they were also accompanied by more than 300 treants. They were all fully armed guards with fiery red skin. This was definitely the most elite force in the palace. The treant that Dingming was following was also among them. At this moment, the high priest was asking, "Did you find it?" The treant shook its head and said, "I can't find it. It should have escaped in the direction of the factory." The high priest frowned and said, "If the Holy Spirit is not here, the door of the temple cannot be opened." This was said to the short priest. The short priest did not look dispirited. He said calmly, "It's okay. Even if we can find it, we can't enter. We could try other methods." Dingming immediately understood. The 2 high priests were definitely looking for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit was with Nicole. Now, Nicole could not enter this place. Even Jun Ling and the others could not touch this place, let alone Nicole. Putting aside the mining area, if they wanted to come up in the underwater world, they would either have the strength of a war sovereign or a war master, or they would have to rely on advanced armor. Otherwise, they would not be able to withstand the fierce water pressure and poison. The high priest shouted again, "Loyal guards of the Azurewood tribe, you have followed us here. Now you should know that we have arrived at the real temple. Once the door of the temple is opened, we will be baptized by the Holy Spirit and gain the ability to live forever. We will become immortal. When we return to the surface, we will banish the War God Alliance and return our true home. Our tribe will become truly powerful and stand at the top of the Azurewood tribe and the War God Starfield." The guards seemed to be very excited. They all raised their arms and shouted. Dingming secretly released his telekinesis. He went around the central square and tried to investigate the door. The evil aura was coming from inside the door. Unfortunately, the telekinesis could not penetrate the door. The runes on the door surged with a strange blocking power. It was very gentle. It bounced off with a light touch. Xiao AI said, "There seems to be many strange energies mixed together inside the door. It is very difficult to detect what is inside." Dingming said, "I have a feeling that it is not something good." At this time, the 2 high priests walked to the door. They knelt on the ground and muttered something. It seemed like they were chanting some kind of ancient spell. Dingming still did not move, because there was a new movement in his telekinesis vision. At 3 o'clock, at the top of the Tree of God, a light spot was flickering. It was obvious that a technological device was coming toward the temple. Not long after, the light spot finally became bright. It rushed out of the pool. Upon closer inspection, it was a humanoid armor. It looked like a combination of the Tyrol armor and the Hercules armor. It also held an alloy shield in its hand and an oversized black greatsword on its back. It was made of a mixture of a black alloy and a silver metal. Hansen did not know what material it was made of, but it gave off a cold and mysterious aura. However, Ding Ming didn't underestimate it. The armor's soles, ribs, and back were all equipped with multiple flight propulsion systems, making it extremely agile. It flew a few rounds in the air in a dazzling manner before landing. The two high priests were not surprised. It was normal that this place could be hidden from most people, but it was impossible to hide it from the masters of the War of Gods League. The person inside the armor spoke in a low voice through a loudspeaker. "High Priest, you are too mean. This is such a good place. Why didn't you inform us? Do you want to take it all by yourself?" The High Priest smiled awkwardly and said, "Captain Jiangning, we just arrived here. We were about to send someone to inform you when you came." Ding Ming inwardly thought that since this Jiangning fellow could find his way here, Ji Yin and the others would probably arrive soon as well. Chapter 453. Ji Yin didn't make them wait for too long. Several dots of light flew out from the treetops at the 3 o'clock position. There were a total of 6 suits of armor. Including Jiangning, there were 7 people. These 7 people were undoubtedly the most powerful group of people in the Second Fleet. Ding Ming, who was hiding at the 6 o'clock position, wasn't too happy. Even from such a distance, he could feel the powerful energy fluctuations coming from these 2 groups of people. The people from the blue light group, led by Ji Yin, probably didn't use much origin energy after equipping their suits of armor. Xiao AI's origin energy score was more than 13 million points. The situation on the 2 priests' side was even more exaggerated. Almost all 300 of them instinctively didn't trust the people from the Alliance. Most of them had fully activated their origin energy, and their total origin energy score was as high as 500 million points. Whether it was Ding Ming or the other 2 groups of people, everyone knew that using force here was an extremely unwise move. In fact, the one who felt the most uncomfortable was Ding Ming. He didn't dare use any origin energy, and his aura was completely suppressed. The armor's detection capabilities were extremely powerful, and if he wasn't careful, he would be exposed. Ji Yin's suit of armor was different from the others. This suit of armor looked like a toad, but it had 8 mechanical legs and 4 arms. Instead of the eyes, there were 4 crystal energy spheres. These 4 eyes were probably some kind of weapon system. These people's suits of armor were all quite large, about the same size as the Green Tree tribe members. Thus, it wasn't so awkward for them to talk face to face. Ji Yin was quite polite. He took the initiative to approach them. "High Priests, may I ask if you want to open this door?" He asked very tactfully. Why didn't he ask what was behind the door? Not only did he maintain respect for the priests, but he also forced them not to lie. The High Priest said, "Yes, this should be our tribe's temple, the resting place of the gods." Ji Yin's electronically synthesized voice was also strange. "High Priest, our equipment has detected that this door seems to be sealed by some kind of energy. Do you need help?" The tall and short priest didn't have a Holy Spirit on hand, so they were helpless against this door. Saying that they didn't need it was a lie. Whether it was technology or origin energy, in short, as long as there was enough energy, there was no obstacle that couldn't be opened. The 2 priests knew this in their hearts. With the help of the armor, they might be able to pry open the door. However, the 2 of them looked hesitant. Ji Yin quickly said, "Please don't worry. We have no intention of harassing your god. We are just cooperating with you. Since we are already here, we might as well help you solve the problem." That being said, the dwarf priest asked, Mr. Ji is always willing to help others. We are really sorry, but we certainly can't let Mr. Ji work for nothing. What does Mr. Ji need?" Ji Yan's electronic eyes flashed as he looked around. "I wonder if the 2 of you can sell some of the wood here? I promise to exchange it with the most reasonable deal." The High Priest suddenly sneered. Mr. Ji's appetite is not small. Ji Yan laughed as well. "Actually, this is a piece of cake for you nobles." The dwarf priest said in a low voice, "Mr. Ji, if you really want the wood, it's easy. As long as you can open the door." Hearing their conversation, Dingming also thought to himself, Jian's appetite isn't just big. Both groups of people are very ambitious. Dingming was willing to bet that Jian's armor had scanned this space clearly. This was clearly a huge piece of wood. Not to mention its effects, just its artistic value was immeasurable. Moreover, this huge piece of wood was the temple. If they wanted to take it away, wouldn't they want to uncover the secrets of the temple? The two priests weren't stupid. Even if you said that you wanted to split the wood, your true motive was definitely not that. However, no matter what you wanted to do, the right thing to do was to open the door first. The 7 sets of armor slowly walked in front of the temple door. The electronic eyes on each set of armor were flashing, clearly scanning and analyzing the situation. One of them observed for a long time, then took a few steps back and pulled out a glowing energy sword. It looked like he was preparing to forcefully break open the door. When this person slashed out with his sword, Xiao AI immediately calculated the result. He's a beginner combat master, but his origin energy index is as high as 6 million points. Preliminary estimates show that his armor can convert about 5 times that. The technology behind the armor is not low. Dingming was also observing. Although the combat master swung his sword fiercely, there wasn't even a Dao imprint on the door. It was obvious that brute force would not work. The dwarf priest said in a low voice, "Mr. Ji, the door can only be opened by the Holy Spirit. Now that the Holy Spirit has disappeared, we won't be able to find it in a short period of time. We can come down after we find the Holy Spirit." This dwarf priest was quite meticulous. He had calculated that Jian wouldn't return immediately, and his words were quite reasonable. Sure enough, Jian pondered for a moment, then turned his head and communicated with the other 2 on the internal channel. This time, the 2 sets of armor slowly walked forward. The steel plates on their shoulders opened up, revealing 2 small cannons. Shwa, shwa. 2 bright beams of energy suddenly appeared, striking the door like lightning. The door made a pung-pung sound, and the patterns on the door seemed to be distorting. Everyone was immediately overjoyed. It seemed that the attack of the Holy Spirit was effective. Jian decisively ordered, "Increase the attack." Shwa, 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 shwa. The 2 beams of energy increased to 6 beams, as if lasers were burning a steel plate. The patterns distorted even more, but the door itself was not affected in the slightest. At this time, the people in the square still hadn't discovered the problem, but Dingming felt that the water beneath his feet seemed to be moving slightly. The originally still water in the underground building seemed to have been stirred up. "Continue to increase the power," Ji Yin said again. Shwa, 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 shwa. This time, 2 more sets of armor stepped forward, and the 6 beams of energy increased to 12. Jian's train of thought was not wrong. The Holy Spirit itself was the carrier of energy. If the Holy Spirit was the key to the temple door, then the only way to open it was to have enough energy. The Holy Spirit was also a type of energy. The cannons on the armor were also powerful. As long as they continued to attack, the door would be blasted open sooner or later. It was also at this time that the entire space lit up. The azure wood divine tree, at 10:30, suddenly emitted a golden glow, as if it had been activated. Jian was shocked. "That's right. Increase the power of the attack." "That's not right," Xiao AI suddenly said. "This wood material is strange. Even catoptric deflection can't pierce through it. How can it be activated by such a small amount of energy?" Dingming looked down without blinking. "I feel like the door isn't absorbing their energy. The light from the divine tree is more like a warning." Xiao AI had to agree with Dingming's judgment because the water beneath their feet had obviously increased. The undercurrent in the underground building had caused a butterfly effect. It's like the water below is rising. Xiao AI was a little surprised. Dingming also noticed that the water around them had overflowed the pool and was spreading down the tree branches. The sacred tree at the 9 o'clock position was also activated 3 minutes later. Dingming couldn't stay here any longer. He decisively got out of the pool and climbed between the branches while everyone's attention was still on the gate. He quietly landed on the ground. Judging from the situation, the sacred tree at the 6 o'clock position would be activated in, at most, 10 minutes. At that time, his body would be completely exposed to the detection of the inside of the armor. In fact, it didn't even take 10 minutes. The divine tree at 7:30 lit up after a minute, and the entire space was plated with a layer of gold. Now, every pool seemed to be boiling, and all the water was surging upwards. Jian and the others didn't know if they were too careless or if they were too dazed by the scene in front of them, but no one noticed this strange change. The divine tree's glow was indeed a warning because the divine tree at 6 o'clock was activated 30 seconds later. The interval between each activation was getting shorter and shorter. In front of the door, there were now 6 sets of armor firing at the same time. 24 beams burned the door. With a whoosh, all 7 divine trees were activated. The entire hall was dazzlingly bright. It was so dazzling that it was like a world of gold. Inadvertently, everyone's vision was in a trance for a moment. It was like they were hallucinating. It seemed like something was floating in their vision. "Stop," Ji indecisively ordered. Of course, he also felt that something was wrong. Inside the armor, everyone's main screen had a faint signal interference. In fact, he didn't feel it the most. At that moment, a chill suddenly rose. Ding Meng felt all the hair on his body stand on end. His rich experience and sharp intuition told him that a great danger was coming. There seemed to be an invisible thing floating out from inside the door. It was like a chilly wind blowing out from the depths of the mine. It made people shudder. The worst thing was that this thing couldn't be seen with the naked eye. It couldn't be seen with telekinesis vision. Xiao AI's detection vision was blank. What the hell was this thing? Of course, when he spread his telekinesis vision across the entire hall, the 2 priests immediately noticed it. The high priest waved his scepter and exclaimed, "So it's that kid. Catch him." As soon as his voice fell, before the guards around him could make a move, a muffled sound was heard. From the treetops to the trunks, the pools in each leaf of the 7 huge divine trees began to spurt out. Countless streams of water surged up like a volcanic eruption in all directions. The 7 divine trees had now become 7 water trees. They kept shooting out streams of water, and they were completely shrouded in mist. The explosion of water thousands of meters tall was like the Milky Way of the universe being shattered. It was also like thousands of waterfalls rushing down. This scene was not only majestic, but also extremely shocking. The streams of water flowed into the square and reached everyone's ankles in the blink of an eye. The world of gold had now become an ocean world. Chapter 454. Just as the guards were about to make their move, someone in the crowd suddenly wailed. Everyone turned around and saw a treant rolling on the ground. It looked like it was in great pain. Everyone looked at each other and thought, "What's going on?" They weren't attacked. Xiao AI said, "There is poison in the water, but the composition of these harmful substances has not changed. If they can swim in, they won't be afraid of the poison, so they can't be poisoned." Just as everyone was puzzled, a terrifying scene appeared. The wailing treant seemed to be vaporized. His body parts disappeared bit by bit, turning into invisible air. A living person was gone just like that. Everyone was dumbfounded. Before anyone could react, another person screamed and fell to the ground. He seemed to be struggling with all his might, but in a few seconds he was vaporized and disappeared. Ji Yin and the others immediately scattered. The data inside the battle armor was quickly refreshed. Unfortunately, if even Ding Meng and Xiao AI couldn't detect it, they wouldn't be able to. The water was still rising. In just 1 minute, it had reached everyone's knees. However, in this 1 minute, more than 10 treants had turned into nothingness as if they were possessed. It was as if an invisible demon had emerged from the temple. It could turn people into air. This was scarier than a massacre because no one knew what was going on. The crowd was in chaos. All the treants fled in all directions in the water. The 2 priests were also frightened. They quickly moved away from the temple gate. The vaporization phenomenon continued. The elite guards of the Green Tree clan disappeared into thin air one by one. They didn't even have the ability to resist. Many people fell to the ground and disappeared. Some disappeared while running. Some disappeared while waving their weapons. This was no longer a temple. It was a furnace that could melt people into nothingness. All of a sudden, Dingming also felt a throbbing pain in her brain. It was as if a strange energy had entered her body. This energy was the same as the strange undulations that came from the door of the temple when she had just entered. It caused her consciousness to involuntarily change along with it. "Be careful," Xiao AI yelled, which was a rare occurrence. "Focus. This is a consciousness invasion." However, it was too late. The energy instantly entered the depths of Dingmeng's brain, but the next second, the pearl mark on Dingmeng's forehead suddenly erupted with a golden light that was even more dazzling than the tree of God. The light was so bright that even the people inside the armor felt it was blinding. This light was simply holy light, and it quickly dispelled all negative effects. Dingmeng suddenly felt relaxed. It was as if this energy had been expelled by the mark. "What the hell is that?" Dingmeng was still in shock. The trance in the square were still disappearing one by one. Xiao AI's tone was very grave. "I can't calculate the result, but if I'm not wrong, this ball of energy is very likely a spiritual body." "A spiritual body?" Dingmeng's eyes widened. "But why can't I see it?" Xiao AI said in a low voice. "I'm afraid this isn't an ordinary spiritual body. According to my analysis, this spiritual body isn't complete. However, it still can't be compared to Miaoxing's spiritual body mark. Little rascal just saved you again. Otherwise, you would have been possessed by now." Possession wasn't something rare. In layman's terms, it was a spiritual body that ran into another person's body. However, possession required the spiritual body to be strong, and the method used was also very special. At least in the Federal Empire, no one had been able to completely master this method. Even someone as powerful as Fujin Shui Yu Mountain couldn't do it. He could only rely on the crystal energy artificial body to survive. Dingmeng was puzzled as he watched the green tree guards vaporize one by one. If it's possession, why are all the trance disappearing? Xiao AI said, "This spiritual body probably didn't find a suitable body, so it might as well eliminate the target to make it easier to filter." At this time, the water level had already risen to people's waists. The dwarf priest in the crowd suddenly began to tremble. It was as if something was strangling his throat. "Woo-woo-ka-ka," sound came from his throat. His pupils rapidly changed, and his entire body began to twitch. "What's going on?" The high priest was frightened. He had never seen this kind of thing before. When the water level rose to people's necks, the dwarf priest returned to normal. At this time, everyone spontaneously distanced themselves from him. This was because everyone had seen the strange and terrifying changes on his body. The dwarf priest's pair of pupils had completely turned into vermilion red pupils, emitting a strange and sinister ray of light. If one were to say that a demon really existed, then the dwarf priest's current appearance was definitely one. The dwarf priest stretched his limbs and moved his shoulder joints. He muttered to himself, "Fortunately, I managed to fuse with it before it drowned." Xiao AI said in a low voice, "Oh no, that spiritual body has completely attached itself to his body. It has completely fused with him." Dingmeng seemed to have thought of something as well. When the cluster cannons attacked the door made the tree of God issue a warning. If we continue to attack, the demon-like spiritual body will be released. When the spiritual body comes out, it will look for a suitable body. If it doesn't match, it will kill indiscriminately. The tree of God didn't release this poison to drown us, but to drown the spiritual body before it completely fused with us. Xiao AI said, "Could it be that this isn't a temple, but a prison?" Dingmeng looked at the chaotic crowd in the distance. "I think that's most likely the case." At this time, the water level was completely submerged. Now, no one could stand normally underwater. Many narrow and thin crystal flames shot out from the soles and backs of the 7 suits of armor. They were suspended in the water. The remaining Green Tree Clan guards had an obvious advantage. The fin-like, breathing organs under their ears automatically opened, and they were like fish swimming in the water. They didn't even need to use their limbs to stir up the water. They were like submarines, and their speed was even faster than on land. Ding Ming still stood in place. He didn't need to float up. The origin energy circulating in his body was enough for him to stay underwater for 8 to 10 years without needing to breathe. The dwarf priest suddenly floated up to the surface. Although the water level was constantly rising, the dwarf priest was able to stand on it as if it were flat ground. As he floated up, the high priest also swam up. "Shadow, where are you going?" The dwarf priest's red, demonic eyes coldly swept across the water. He said sternly, "Who is Shadow?" The high priest was stunned. The 7 suits of armor also shot out of the water and floated in the air. Jiang Ning asked sternly, "Who are you?" The dwarf priest didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What are you?" Jiang Ning was also stunned. This dwarf priest seemed to have become a completely different person. Could it be that he couldn't tell that this was a suit of armor? The dwarf priest's red eyes suddenly flashed. He said in surprise, "This suit of armor isn't bad. I want it." After saying this, he miraculously floated up. It was as if a pair of invisible hands had lifted him into the air. Although his speed was slow, he instantly exploded with powerful fluctuations. Then he clawed at Jiang Ning. Since he made the first move, Ji Yin and the others naturally wouldn't stay idle. Immediately, 3 bright white beams shot towards him. Everyone thought that he would dodge, but he didn't seem to care at all. He allowed the beams to hit him and burn him as he charged towards Jiang Ning. Jiang Ning was also shocked. As he quickly retreated, he immediately brandished his giant alloy sword to slash at the dwarf's claw. The dwarf priest's other hand suddenly slapped out from the side, slapping the giant sword aside. His right claw grabbed the armor's shoulder. He clearly wasn't fast, but Jiang Ning couldn't dodge. Moreover, this slap was inconceivably ingenious. The dwarf priest forcefully pulled at the armor after grabbing it, as if he wanted to rip it off. However, Jiang Ning didn't dare to be careless. He quickly activated the energy defense array. A large amount of energy was released. The armor was immediately covered in an energy shield filled with electricity. The shield also forcefully shook off the dwarf priest. The dwarf priest fell into the water. His expression was furious. "Little worm, you dare to attack me?" Jian decisively ordered, "Go." This was to shed all pretense of cordiality and prepare to fight against the Green Tree clan. However, in the next moment, the dwarf priest once again flew up from the water. This time, his entire body was like a cannonball as he directly smashed his head into Jiang Ning. This kind of unimaginable attack was completely unexpected. With a muffled thump, the shield didn't break, but the armor was knocked back dozens of meters. After his successful collision, 2 giant alloy swords and an energy light sword behind him attacked at the same time. The dwarf priest didn't even look. He waved his hand, and the steel ring weapon on the bone scepter emitted a large amount of silver light. It covered the 3 giant swords like mercury flowing down the ground. Then there was a series of ding, ding, dang, dang, dang sounds. Sparks madly flashed in the air. The power of the silver light was astonishing, and it quickly turned into countless crescent-shaped blades that covered the 3 battle armors. The 3 of them did not expect this priest of the Green Tree tribe to be so strong and were caught off guard. They were all hit by the blades. With a whoosh, the blades retracted, and the 3 armor bodies were also repelled. Upon closer inspection, the 3 shields were actually riddled with scars from the blades. Many of the steel plates in front of the armor bodies had also fallen off. Jian couldn't help but be shocked. This kind of true warrior armor was made of 128 yuan super alloy. How could the Green Tree clan's weapons cause such damage? In fact, the one who was the most shocked was not him, but Ding Ming, who was hiding under the water. Before the dwarf priest was possessed by the spirit, this blade light was already able to cause damage to his diamond shield. Moreover, the current blade light was able to damage the shield, and at the same time, it was able to repel 3 advanced battle armors. This was enough to prove that after the evil spirit possessed the dwarf priest, this was only a very ordinary attack. The true strength of the evil spirit was hard to imagine. However, the dwarf priest attack had completely enraged the people of the blue light group. Jian had already issued an order in the internal channel. Increase the conversion rate. Activate the kinetic energy reactor. Maintain the formation. Don't be polite with them. Kill them. As soon as he gave the order, the 7 sets of armor activated their electromagnetic shields one after another, and more crystal flames sprayed out from all over their bodies. The increase in energy and the strengthening of the crystal flames caused the temperature to suddenly rise, causing the water to boil and a large amount of dense white gas to appear. Chapter 455. The 7 people from the blue light group were probably old partners. The 7 armors formed a fan-shaped formation in the air, and the cannons on their shoulders were all locked onto the dwarf priest. 7 thin and bright energy beams accurately hit his chest, burning it with sizzling sounds. The dwarf priest's physique was surprisingly good, and he was almost completely immune to the energy beams. No matter how hard they attacked, he was not injured at all. Jian's toad armor flew to the top of the center, and the 4 crystal ball eyes on the toad began to glow and gather energy. 2 of the mechanical arms began to transform, and 2 larger energy-gathering light balls extended. A moment later, all the light balls fired a large number of energy cannons. The appearance of these energy cannons was very strange, and they looked like extremely twisted sky blue scimitars. As soon as Jian opened fire, it formed a barrage of bullets. Countless scimitars covered the sky and earth, and the trajectories of the scimitars were not straight lines. Instead, they shot out in a disorderly manner, covering a large area of the water. This scene was even more violent and spectacular than the water tree explosion. The cannons did not explode immediately when they came into contact with the water. Instead, they had to drill into the water for a few seconds before cracking. For a moment, there were muffled sounds underwater. Many of the Trant guards were badly battered by the explosions. This level of attack was not fatal, but under the continuous bombardment, many of them could not take it anymore. They either dove back down or rose to the surface and turned into minced corpses. The dwarf priest in the center of the water could not be seen at all. The energy cannons cracked on his body and naturally turned into a constantly expanding blue pupil. Ding Meng, who was underwater, was also observing the bombardment of these cannons. These cannons seemed to be mixed with an even more deadly and harmful substance. It seemed to be some kind of poison that was specially developed to deal with the Green Tree tribe. Not long after the cannons exploded in the water, the color of the water gradually turned black. Many of the guards came into contact with this black water. At first, they were fine, but after that, they began to feel unbearably itchy. Many of them scratched their bodies and struggled in the water. Not long after, the skin of the Trants began to fester, and it was rotting at a speed visible to the naked eye. This situation was a bit like metal being corroded in sulfuric acid, and it faded away bit by bit. However, Jian did not seem to have any intention of stopping. He continued to fire fiercely for 3 whole minutes. By then, most of the elite guards of the Green Tree tribe were dead. Corpses and remains could be seen floating in the water. It was still the same logic. Ding Meng had noticed this after exchanging blows with the high priest. There was nothing wrong with the high priest's strategy of not worrying about victory, but in a battle between experts, if you did not seize the initiative, you would be at a disadvantage. When the high priest summoned his shield, he discovered that Ding Meng was still standing in the water, unmoving. However, the water around him began to surge rapidly, and it seemed to be revolving around him. Not good. The high priest was aware of Ding Meng's evil intentions. This guy wanted to trap him underwater. The water flow was clearly created by the other party's telekinesis. Dying. The high priest pointed his scepter downwards, and the shield left his body and charged straight at Ding Meng. Ding Meng still did not move. He only raised his head and stared coldly at the high priest. The shield stopped in midair, unable to move forward or explode. Last time, Ding Ming had been a little careless. However, this time, he was prepared. He immediately activated 7 origin points and sent out a few thousand telekinesis points. It would be strange if the High Priest's shield could hit him. Not only did the shield not explode, but it was also quickly sucked in by the nearby water. The water spun faster and faster, and the turbulence caused by it grew larger and larger. The High Priest finally realized that with Ding Ming as the center, the High Priest's telekinesis was stirring up the water around him, forming a giant whirlpool. It seemed like the High Priest was trying to suck him in. In your dreams, the High Priest's body shook violently. He also released a large amount of telekinesis in an attempt to stop the water flow. Not to mention that kinetic telekinesis was a few levels weaker than general telekinesis. When his telekinesis waves smashed into the surging waves, it was like mud sinking into the sea. It was swept away in an instant without even the slightest ripple. At this time, the diameter of the whirlpool had increased to more than 50 meters. The High Priest could not withstand it at all and was sucked in as well. Then, this undercurrent was pushed to the surface by Ding Ming. You can't stay down here. Rise to the surface and face the group of people. On the surface of the water, the blue-white light gathered by the energy beams and energy cannons had a diameter of more than 100 meters. The convergence rate was ridiculously high. The two groups of people obviously felt the undercurrent underwater, so when the High Priest was pulled to the surface, Ji Yin and the others decisively stopped attacking. Swoosh! An arrow-shaped beam of light shot out from the pupil of energy towards both sides. After extending to a certain distance, it retracted back. At this moment, the pupil of energy exploded with a bang. This destructive blow actually caused the pool water that was originally constantly rising to be forcibly pushed down by 5 meters. The explosion caused the pool water to be like a tsunami, setting off monstrous waves. The 7 battle armors changed their formation again, stacking on top of each other like a pyramid. Inside the battle armors, Ji Yin and the others had solemn expressions. Everyone had seen clearly just now that the High Priestess had turned into nothingness in the white light of the explosion, but the dwarf priest had not moved at all. After the waves had calmed down, the dwarf priest was still standing on the water surface, coldly staring at the 7 of them. The light from the red demonic eyes was even more intense and sharp, like rays of light. It would be a lie to say that Ji Yin and the others were not scared. The low priest stretched his body and hatefully said, "A group of insignificant humans, an ant-like existence in this universe. You can't even be considered an inferior race, yet you dare to be rude to me again and again. You've angered me, really?" With him as the center, the air around him faintly distorted, and the water below his feet seemed to have turned into mist. This was definitely the result of his origin energy secretly increasing. According to Xiao AI's data, the low priest's origin energy index had reached a maximum of 1 million, which was the standard of a beginner combat master. After being possessed by the evil spirit, his origin energy index had soared to 7 million, which was very close to that of an advanced combat master. However, with the increase in his aura, his origin energy index had soared to 5 million, which was the standard of a beginner combat master. In the end, what kind of spirit was this? It was actually so powerful that it could increase one's origin energy index. The low priest probably never imagined that his body could reach such a level. Of course, the people inside the suits of armor would definitely be able to detect these changes. Ji Yin said in a low voice, "Everyone, activate your ion shields. Be careful of this guy. He might be about to retaliate." How could the low priest only retaliate? He raised a single hand, and a large amount of silver light was flung out. This silver light was like a wave that surged into the sky. This time, it should be the steel rings that automatically attacked, and the silver waves rolled towards the battle armor formation. Ding, 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 ding. The surface of the ion shields flashed wildly. It was clear that they were enduring this crazy attack. The main one bearing the brunt of this attack was a battle armor in the lower right corner of the formation. This kind of fierce, sweeping attack only lasted for 5 seconds before disappearing with a chi sound. However, the low priest figure suddenly appeared in the silver light. His right hand grabbed the left arm of the battle armor like lightning, and he threw the battle armor out. This throw seemed very casual, but the strength behind it was beyond imagination. This was because the battle armor somersaulted in the air, and crystal flames erupted from all over its body. It was likely that the soldier inside was desperately controlling the battle armor to maintain its balance. Moreover, this throw covered a distance of 70 to 80 meters. Even if two battle armors were to fight each other, they wouldn't be able to produce such an effect. Chapter 456. The armor flew about 100 meters in the air before stabilizing itself. But just as it came to a stop, the dwarf priest figure once again arrived. Boom! This fist didn't hit anywhere else but the steel plate on the chest of the armor. Generally speaking, this part of the armor was the hardest, and most soldiers were located there. After all, the armor faced too many different kinds of attacks in battle, and the first to bear the brunt was usually the front. This principle was similar to the heart of the human body, and martial artists were the best at defending the vital parts. But the dwarf priest was so willful. He directly sent the armor flying with a punch. This time, the armor's back smashed into the edge of the tree. A single leaf of the tree was larger than the armor, so the armor was equivalent to smashing into a wall. Not only was the dwarf priest's strength great, but his movements were also fast. He was completely dodging, and in a flash, he arrived at the wall. First, he grabbed the armor's arm, and then he swung it high into the air and finally smashed it into the wall. With a muffled sound, the back of the armor flashed with electric sparks. The 128 yuan super alloy was indeed hard, but could it be harder than the best quality wood of the Azure Divine Tree? Even if this smash didn't help, the armor would definitely be damaged. However, this wasn't the end. The dwarf priest clung to the wall, swung the armor back, and smashed it into the wall again. This time, the armor's face hit the wall. With a crackling sound, a lot of the steel plates on the face fell off. Boom! 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 The armor, which was regarded as a weapon by origin ability users, was now like a toy in the hands of a child in the dwarf priest's hands. It was swung back and forth, and it didn't even have the slightest strength to resist. In fact, it wasn't that it didn't have any. No matter how much the soldiers adjusted the armor's power and kinetic energy, they still couldn't break free from the dwarf priest's hands. This kind of smashing didn't feel like a battle, but more like the dwarf priest venting his anger. Ji Yin and the others quickly rushed over, but they could only watch helplessly. If everyone attacked together and the dwarf priest used the armor as a shield, the people inside would be finished. Moreover, no one doubted that the dwarf priest had the ability to do so. After another 7 or 8 hits, many parts of the armor were already heavily damaged. The steel plate of the main body was completely shattered, and the sparks were very dense. It was in danger of disintegrating at any time. This freak, Jian, gritted his teeth in anger. Increase the conversion rate to the maximum. Charge! The conversion rate of the true warrior battle armor was 5 times its original value. These people in front of him were all at the combat master level. In Ding Meng's data view, these people's energy values had all risen to around 20 million points, while Ji Yan's value had risen to an exaggerated 32 million points. With the increase in strength, speed, and agility would undoubtedly increase by several levels. The 5 battle armors whizzed over like lightning, and fiercely hacked at the dwarf priest with their swords. The dwarf priest's steel rings also danced like snowflakes in the air as he fought back. Both sides were locked in a fierce battle. To be honest, the cooperation of this group of people from the blue light group was really flawless. Looking from a distance, it felt like 5 airplanes were constantly circling around the dwarf priest. None of the airplanes caused any gaps or flaws. Instead, it was the dwarf priest who was constantly being attacked. Xiao AI analyzed, there's still a gap in strength. This dwarf priest can't beat them. Ding-Ming shook his head and said, "It's not like that. He's attached to the dwarf priest's body. That body can't display his true strength at all. The last time he fought with the dwarf priest gave him the feeling that his telekinesis and spells were very powerful, but his own origin energy foundation was relatively average. His initial judgment was that the dwarf priest was hovering between a combat master and a combat master. If this spirit body had the strength of a general, the dwarf priest body wouldn't be able to withstand it. At this moment, the 5 battle armors suddenly pulled away after attacking for a while, surrounding the dwarf priest. At the same time, the shoulder cannons once again spat out energy beams onto his body, starting a new round of burning. This kind of technological energy attack didn't seem to have any effect on him, so the dwarf priest still didn't dodge. However, this time, the white beam attack suddenly turned red after 3 seconds. What formed on his body wasn't an eye of light, but countless strands of energy tightly binding him like a fishing net. By the time the dwarf priest realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. In the distance, Ji-Yin, who hadn't made a move all this time, had now finished charging. The eyeballs of the toad armor once again shot out scimitar-shaped bullets, but the scimitar was no longer sky blue. Instead, it was crimson like the beam. Clearly, it had a different effect. Another storm of energy shells shot out. The scimitar didn't explode when it slashed the dwarf priest's body, but it produced a unique tearing effect. At first, it was a simple collision. The dwarf priest seemed to be fine, but then the scimitar cut through his skin like a real sharp blade. Following that, his flesh split open and blood splattered. This attack was completely like a solar storm. The dwarf priest's body was cut bit by the fiery red torrent, until he was reduced to nothingness in the storm. Xiao AI said, "This is a pulse wave formed by electromagnetic radiation, high-energy charged particles, and superpolymerized plasma. This armor's weapon system isn't bad." Once the dwarf priest died, the divine trees in all directions suddenly stopped shooting. The shrine quieted down, and the water level also began to recede. Ding-Ming still stood in place without moving, but there was a contemplative expression on his face. Ji-Yin and the others also slowly lowered their flying altitude as the water level dropped, but they were still floating in the air. The 6 battle armor's positions were very ingenious. They were also high up, sandwiching Ding-Ming in the middle. The eyeballs of the toad armor kept flashing, as if they were carefully scanning Ding-Ming. The screen inside the armor showed that Ding-Ming was only a level 9 spirit weapon user. However, Ji-Yin didn't underestimate Ding-Ming. Just from the fact that he had created such a large undercurrent vortex underwater, it was impossible for him to be a spirit weapon user. "Hello." Ji-Yin slowly opened his mouth. "Kataga should still be in the factory, right?" Ding-Ming said, "That's right." Ji-Yin said, "The energy carrier of the Green Tree Tribe should be in your hands, right?" Ding-Ming said, "That's right." Ji-Yin said, "You have a way to find it for us, right?" He was indeed thinking about the door. Ding-Ming hesitated and said, "You want me to join you, get the carrier, and then open the door?" Ji-Yin's voice had a hint of a smile. "You are indeed a smart person. You know where to stand." Ding-Ming was silent. Then he said, "There's something I've always found strange. You seem to have known that there was a god hidden on planet 36. Ji-Yin said, "It's not a god, but a strange entity." Ding-Ming frowned. "Did the 2 priests tell you?" Ji-Yin said proudly, "There's no need to tell them. Even they don't know what it is. I only knew that it was a strange entity when I heard them describe the worship ceremony that is held once every 10 years. Ding-Ming said, "So you were planning to use Kataga's first fleet as cannon fodder?" The toad's eyes flashed even faster. Ji-Yan's voice turned cold. "You know quite a lot." Ding-Ming said in a low voice, "You can use such a large fleet as cannon fodder, and the lives of tens of thousands of people on the fleet will be lost just like that. It looks like what you really want is more valuable than all of this. I'm guessing that it's not just the superconducting ore. If I had to choose between the two, I wouldn't choose the ore. I'd rather have that fleet." Ji Yin stared at Ding Meng and suddenly laughed. So, between the spirit core and the fleet, how should you choose? You don't need me to teach you this, do you? The spirit core was what the Divine War Starfield called it. If this thing was placed in the Federal Empire, it would be a pure natural inverse source crystal. Chapter 457. Ji Yin said, "It seems like I have no choice but to admit that it was provided by the Alliance." Ding Meng said, "You're wrong. It wasn't provided by the Alliance, but by you. After they took it, they secretly poisoned the king. Only the two of them had the chance to get close to the king because he trusted them too much." Ji Yin said in a low voice, and then Ding Meng said, "Once you took over King City, the two priests naturally had to go to the mining area. I'm guessing that the king didn't know at first, but when he realized that you were attacking the Tree of God, he naturally followed. Other things aside, the mining area was heavily guarded. Without your permission, how could the king have walked to the pool area? He happened to be in the middle of the pool, and he died from the poison. All of this is too much of a coincidence." Ji Yin said, "You can say whatever you want." Ding Meng sneered, "Of course. Now that almost everyone is dead, you've basically achieved your goal. If I provide you with energy, I'm afraid I'll die even faster." Ji Yin sighed. "Sometimes it's not a good thing to be too smart. Do you know that if a person could be a little more muddle-headed, they can live longer?" As he said this, Ding Meng was already on full alert. As expected, the other 5 suits of armor shot out 5 white energy beams at almost the same time, heading straight for his head. Ding Meng quickly raised his hand and used the diamond star fusing art. He opened his palm and caught the 5 energy beams. In the eyes of the 5 soldiers, Ding Meng was definitely going to die. It could be said that he would be reduced to ashes in 2 seconds at most. However, 5 seconds had passed, and Ding Meng was standing there perfectly fine. Instead, the 5 soldiers felt like Ding Meng's palm was like a bottomless pit that was constantly devouring their technology. Ding Meng looked at Ji Yin and sneered. "Unfortunately, I'm not the 2 priests, and I don't want to end up like them." Ji Yin was also a little surprised. He immediately said in the channel, "I didn't expect this kid to be so good. Increase the attack." Boom. The 5 energy beams immediately became thicker, and the light became brighter. Chi, 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 chi. The increase in attack power also meant that the energy input would increase exponentially. It was not that the diamond star fusing art could not absorb such a huge amount of energy. The main reason was that Ding Meng's current smelting energy came from Xinguang Biotechnology's energy. Crystal energy was relatively low-end, so absorbing too much would not benefit him. Thus, Ding Meng's palm instantly formed a pupil of light that kept on expanding. It was just like the pupil of light that had killed the high priest. When it expanded to a certain extent, it would spontaneously explode. Anyone who was in the middle of it would definitely die. I'll let you have a taste of your own power. Ding Meng held the luminous pupil with his left hand while punching it with his right fist. The flame-penetrating force hit the surface of the pupil and stopped. The penetrating force vibrated inside, and at this moment, the energy inside the pupil was activated. The pupil shot out countless energy raindrops in the opposite direction. The situation was like a particle laser cannon sweeping wildly at the battle armor. Clink, 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 clink. Chi, 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 chi. The 5 soldiers did not expect Ding Meng to be able to control the energy of their attacks. They were all caught off guard and were shot in the chest. Ding Meng was not burned. Instead, there were many scorched marks on the battle armor. The 5 soldiers immediately stopped shooting and raised their shields to block. It would have been fine if they hadn't raised their shields, but as soon as they did, Ding Meng flew up and swept out with her foot. The 30-meter diameter light pupil quickly flew into the sky and exploded with a boom. The 5 warframes were immediately sent flying. At this moment, the 4 crystal balls of the Toad battle armor were once again fully charged. The scimitars once again flew out like a torrential rain, disorderly and chaotic as they hurtled towards Ding Meng. Ding Meng was already prepared. The catoptric deflection sword on his belt automatically popped out and turned into a sharp cross-shaped blade that spun rapidly to form a disc in front of him. This time, the scimitars were not blue with the explosive effect, nor were they red with the cutting effect. Instead, they were a strange dark green. The moment the scimitars hit the disc, they exploded into a cloud of green with a hint of black mist. This was clearly a poison gas bomb. Unfortunately, Jian had the wrong idea this time. Ding Meng had the gene body of the K virus that was immune to all poisons. Therefore, even though the cloud of black smoke was slowly growing larger, Ding Meng's aura did not weaken at all. Jian fired for a full minute before stopping. It was probably because of the 2 consecutive rounds of bombardment that caused the energy to be unable to keep up with the pace. This time, the firing time was shorter. Even so, the explosion produced a large cloud of poisonous gas. The poisonous gas did not dissipate. Instead, it slowly faded until it disappeared. Seeing that Ding Meng was still standing there unscathed, Ji Yin and the others were quite surprised. From a moment Ding Meng entered the square, he had not even moved a single step. With a swoosh, the sharp cross-shaped blade transformed back into a great sword and returned to Ding Meng's hand. Ding Meng said expressionlessly, "Is that it?" The 5 mechs that had been sent flying regrouped. 3 alloy greatswords, 1 energy sword, and 1 vibration blade slashed towards Ding Meng in unison. Ding Meng waved his hand, and the first 3 great swords were broken in half. Energy swords could not cut through anything, so when Ding Meng swung his great sword, he twisted his body and staggered. With a Thomas roundhouse kick, he swept the wrist of the mechs. The energy sword immediately changed direction and stabbed towards the vibration blade on the side. The 2 mechs obviously did not expect Ding Meng to be so strong. In a panic, they quickly retreated. Taking advantage of this opening, Ding Meng used transient steps and suddenly flashed behind one of the mechs. He then swung his great sword backhandedly. The great sword directly pierced through the mech's shoulder and almost removed the entire mechanical arm. The mech warrior's reaction was not slow at all. After being ambushed, he quickly turned around and punched back. There seemed to be a layer of electromagnetism on his fist. This punch was definitely not going to hit, because Ding Meng immediately retreated. When his fist hit the ground, a thick electric current swam on the ground like a snake and exploded towards Ding Meng. Both sides were competing in speed. Before the electric current hit, Ding Meng had already leaped into the air and performed his signature fish leaping over the dragon gate, backhand chop in midair. His chop was not only ferocious, but also quite tricky. It would not cut anywhere else but the shoulder that had just been injured. With a muffled sound, the mech warrior fell to the ground. Seeing their comrade fall to the ground, the remaining 4 mechs once again swarmed up. This time, catoptric deflection turned into 4 short swords. Under the effect of telekinesis, the swords flew towards the 4 people in a circle, making ding-ding-ding sounds. This kind of long-distance sword manipulation was much more difficult to deal with than ordinary opponents. This was because the swordsmanship was completely out of the ordinary. There was no pattern to it, so it was very difficult to judge its momentum. The principle was the same as 7-star Ghost Kick. Moreover, the mechs were obviously at a disadvantage when fighting against each other. Catoptric deflection was incomparably sharp. With just a few swings, the alloy shield was cut in half. As the swordsmanship was fully unleashed, the steel plates on the mech were constantly falling off. At this moment, Jian had to make a move even if he did not want to. He had already seen that the kid in front of him was many times stronger than the dwarf priest. If he did not get rid of this big trouble, there would be endless trouble in the future. Therefore, he decisively jumped up and attacked Ding Meng with the most standard punch. The power of this punch was also extremely strong. Not only was the sound of the punch sharp, but there seemed to be a layer of light yellow plating on the glove. It was probably something like the source steel shield of the steel system. Before the punch arrived, the force of the punch arrived first. Bang! Ding Meng met the punch with a punch. Similarly, He used the penetrating flame technique first. The air instantly exploded, and the airflow that was stirred up was so strong that it was faintly blowing up people's faces. Then the two fists collided. Bang! There was an explosion. This time, the air did not explode. Instead, it twisted like a vortex before fiercely exploding. Pa! 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 The two of them both took a few steps back. Xiao AI said in a low voice, "His mech's conversion rate has already exceeded 5 times. It is not recommended to fight a battle of attrition." Ding Ming secretly nodded. This Ji Yin was just as Kataga had described. He really did have some strength. He did not dare to underestimate Ji Yin, but Ji Yin did not dare to underestimate him either. Just now, it seemed that they were evenly matched, but in reality, he had secretly suffered a great loss. The reason was very simple. The protective plating on the glove had already shattered without a trace. If he did not have the mech's armor, that punch would have been enough to seriously injure him. Ding Ming waved his hand again. The catoptric deflection merged back into a large sword and flew back, as if it had grown eyes. If he wanted to deal with Ji Yin, he had to first destroy his mech. Once the catoptric deflection returned, the other 4 people were freed. However, the 4 mechs were already covered in wounds. There were small cuts all over their bodies. The damage was estimated to be more than 65%. They basically had no combat power left. However, the 4 of them were not satisfied. They did not retreat, even after being forced to retreat. Instead, they surrounded Ding Ming again. Ding Ming did not move. Seeing that the 4 of them were about to reach him, Ding Ming suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a thick black fog. This was the poisonous gas that Ji Yin had used to attack him. He had secretly absorbed the poisonous gas and had been holding it in his throat. He had been waiting for this opportunity. Because there were many cuts in the mech's armor, it was very easy for air to enter. Even if there were emergency measures in place, they would not be able to stop it in time. Thus, as soon as the black fog was spat out, all 4 mechs were hit without exception. They collapsed one after another in just 3 seconds. His telekinesis vision could clearly see that the moment the origin ability users inside the mech's armor came into contact with the poison, their throats began to crack. They did not even have time to scream before their facial muscles began to fester and rot. In the blink of an eye, they were reduced to a pile of white bones. The poison took effect even faster than the trance. After all, the trance had lived in the divine forest for many years, so they could more or less resist the poison. However, the origin ability users in the Divine War Star field had almost no resistance to poison. The 4 mechs lay on the ground. They were now completely empty shells. Ding Ming said calmly, "I told you to have a taste of your own medicine. I didn't expect your poison to be so powerful." Ji Yin stared coldly at Ding Ming. He had lost 4 of his 6 subordinates in an instant, and the other 2 mechs were heavily damaged. He was now the only one left. This kid in front of him could not be defeated by technological weapons or melee weapons. He was also not afraid of facing him head-on, and he was also immune to poison. This was a classic example of a decathlete. If he did not use his ultimate skill, he would have been defeated today. Xiao AI decisively said, "Be careful. I detected that his mech has gathered a very strong energy source. He's probably charging the weapon system again." Chapter 458. The toad armor's eyes suddenly retracted, and then its wide mouth slowly opened, revealing an even larger, glowing crystal ball. Just by looking at the constantly changing colors on the surface of the crystal ball, one could tell that Ji Yin was about to use the armor's high-end weapons. Xiao AI immediately warned, "Be careful. The energy is very strong. This is a photon weapon." Photon weapons were the high-temperature photon effect produced by the collision of electric particles at a focal point. They were more powerful than electric particle lasers and energy beams in that they were very stealthy and difficult to detect. Highly condensed photon weapons had excellent penetrative performance and were one of the mainstream weapons in space combat. If the toad armor could be equipped with such a thing, Then it seemed that Ji Yan's armor had come from the hands of an expert. He had basically transplanted the weapons on a starship onto it. With a clang, Ding Ming decisively activated his diamond mirror image. It didn't matter if it was a photon weapon or a photon weapon. As long as he had enough origin energy in his body, there was nothing that he couldn't block. Whoosh! This was an extremely soft sound. The air between Ji Yan and Ding Ming seemed to tremble slightly, but it was impossible for anyone else to see it clearly. However, in Ding Ming's eyes, an extremely fine beam of light struck the surface of the shield like a bolt of lightning. The origin energy fluctuations of the shield were immediately weakened by more than half, and he estimated that it would shatter in at most 5 seconds. Ding Ming was taken aback. He quickly poured more origin energy into the shield, and the color and luster of the shield immediately returned to normal. At this moment, the beam of light suddenly became thicker, and its power increased by at least 3 times, causing the shield to emit a ding-ding-ding sound. It seemed that Ji Yan was going all out in order to take down Ding Ming. This was the limit of his attack, and he was overdrawing the silver core stone's energy. Ding! The sizzling sound was so dense that it almost sounded like a single sound. The shield went from golden to pale white, and it looked like it was about to disappear, but then it suddenly went from pale white back to golden yellow. Ding Ming was obviously competing with him. "I'd like to see just how much energy you have stored." Ding Ming's eyes focused slightly, and the sword in his hand pierced towards the armor's heart. Whoosh! The toad armor was also covered by a particle shield with electric currents. The long sword was also nailed to the surface of the shield, as if it was trying its best to drill forward. The shield was flashing with a strong light, the frequency of which was not at all slower than the burning of the mirror image. If the laser beam could penetrate Ding Ming's diamond mirror image, it was hard to say whether Ding Ming would be fine. However, if the long sword broke through the shield, Ji Yan would be in big trouble. Ji Yan had seen it with his own eyes. Ding Ming's sword could even cut through 128 yuan alloy. Although the toad armor was stronger than other armors, its material was not much better. If Ding Ming could cut through other armors, then there was a high chance that he could cut through the toad armor. "You brat, let's see how long you can last." Ji Yan fiddled with the control panel for a while, and the attack of the laser beam was still increasing in intensity. It was like a half-meter-long beam of light attacking the mirror image. 10 seconds later, there was a crisp sound, and the mirror image shattered. Ji Yan was overjoyed. "Go to hell." The crystal ball in his eyes flipped over again, and the familiar laser beam shot out again. The 4 laser beams combined with the central beam made it seem as if the main and secondary cannons of the starship were firing at the same time. Ji Yan did not believe that a martial artist could withstand such a powerful attack. However, the scene of Ding Ming turning into ashes did not happen. This was because the moment the mirror image shattered, Ding Ming quickly raised his hand. His wrist seemed to produce an endless suction force, and a laser beam and laser beams were all sucked into it. Ji Yan was dumbfounded. He took a closer look and saw that Ding Ming was wearing a bronze alloy wrist guard that had blocked the beam of light. It seemed to be attracting his attack, and the color of the wrist guard increased with the intensity of the attack, turning into a state of light. What kind of equipment was this? Ji Yan had never seen such a magical and powerful wristband before. This was the strategic weapon that the Singularity had given to Ding Ming on Maka Planet. It could absorb the energy of the enemy's attack. The attack continued, but Ding Ming raised his right arm and walked step by step towards the toad armor. Anyone could see that Ji Yan's photon weapon was completely useless against the powerful defense of Xinguang Technologies. Ding Ming looked at Ji Yan and laughed coldly. "It seems like you don't have to go back and explain yourself. This time, you will die here." After he finished speaking, the bracers shone brightly, and a fine beam of light shot out from the bracers towards the toad armor. This was using Ji Yan's attack energy to turn into a beam of light to hit back at Ji Yan. It was a classic case of giving someone a taste of their own medicine. TCH, cha-cha-cha. The laser beam hit the surface of the toad armor's particle shield. This time, the shield was not flashing wildly. Instead, It was flashing like a light pupil, and it was suffering an unprecedented attack. Ding Ming's thinking was very clear. No matter how powerful the armor was, it was still an armor and not a starship. Such a fierce attack would consume more energy than the armor could handle. How can you work for the Cyan Tree tribe? Ding Ming said, "You're wrong. You're a human, and so are the Cyan Tree tribe. They don't work for anyone. The one thing you shouldn't have done is to use poison to harm others." He was clearly speaking up for Nikona. It was normal for the two of them to fight and kill each other, but poor people like Nikona's parents shouldn't have died so tragically. Ji Yin gritted his teeth and said, "Above the strong. This is an unchanging law." "Fine, then I'll use your method power." Ding Ming's right hand suddenly exerted force. His catoptric deflection pierced through Ji Yan's origin power force field, and the sharp tip of his sword reached Ji Yan's chest like a bolt of lightning. Only now did Ji Yan realize that he had greatly underestimated Ding Ming. Ding Ming didn't seem to be very powerful, but every time he attacked, he was able to raise his limit. Moreover, the rate at which he was able to do so would increase dramatically. This strike was also very ordinary, but Ji Yan knew very well that Ding Ming was a spirit general if this strike was able to pierce through his force field. Even so, just as he closed his eyes and prepared to die, Ding Ming's sword stopped right in front of his chest, but it didn't pierce through. Ji Yan opened his eyes and said in shock, "It won't kill me." Ding Ming's gaze became even more sympathetic. "You're wrong again, because you're already dead." Ji Yan didn't understand these words. In fact, he would never have the chance to understand them. At this moment, it was as if his neck had been strangled by an invisible hand. His entire face turned purple, and his throat began to emit crackling sounds. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he began to foam at the mouth. His entire body convulsed violently. This reaction was exactly the same as when the dwarf priest had been possessed by the evil spirit. Indeed, about 10 seconds later, Ji Yan returned to normal. However, his pupils had completely transformed into a demonic pair of eyes that glowed with an evil red light. The evil spirit was now possessing Ji Yan's body. "Commander!" Jiang Ning cried out in shock. Ding Ming said coldly, "He's no longer your commander. If you don't want to die, stay away from him." Jiang Ning froze in place. She didn't know whether or not she should believe Ding Ming's words. She had thought that with such a powerful force in this temple, everything would go smoothly. She hadn't expected that in the end, she would be the only one left. The evil spirit stretched its limbs and opened its arms to look at its body. It said with satisfaction, "It's a little weak, but it's more suitable than the previous body." This layer of origin substance was almost the same color as Ding Ming's diamond mirror image, and a sharp claw appeared on the fist. The claw lashed out like lightning, leaving behind afterimages in the air. Although the other party was a hardened warlord, his speed was even faster than the speed of light. Dang, 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 dang. A large swath of dazzling sword light quickly appeared in the center of the plaza. Moreover, there was only the sword light, but no one could see the person. The frequency of the two people's attacks was something that even Jiang Ning, who was far away, could not see clearly. The evil spirit's hardened body was extremely powerful. Aside from its powerful defense, the hardened body was also very oppressive. Every time the two sides clashed, Ding Ming would feel an indescribable pressure. It was as uncomfortable as when he had broken through the origin barrier. That kind of feeling was like a gust of wind blowing in his face. First, it would slow down his movements, then slowly increase the pressure until he was as hard as an iron wall. Finally, it would become as oppressive as a mountain. Ding Ming was only able to fight the evil spirit for a long time because of his strength. If it had been Jiang Ning in his place, he would have probably been suffocated after just a few exchanges. Yeah. Ding Ming roared angrily as he slashed out with his sword. This was the Overlord's mountain-crushing force, and it directly sent the evil spirit sliding backwards. The evil spirit was also a little surprised. The explosive power of the human in front of it was truly ferocious. It barely managed to stabilize its body, and its claws once again danced through the air. In his telekinesis vision, a golden spherical force field suddenly appeared out of thin air, completely enveloping Ding Meng. Moreover, the force field was constantly shrinking like a bubble that was trying to squeeze Ding Meng to death. The surface of the bubble was also changing with all kinds of complicated patterns. There was more than one bubble like this. Instead, they appeared one after another, stacked together, and then squeezed one after another. This martial technique reminded Ding Meng of a formidable opponent, the leader of the rebel army, Quan Jinwei, who had once lived under the immortal Weaver planet. Quan Jinwei's holy wall was roughly similar to this, but Quan Jinwei's holy wall was a wall, while the evil spirit's was a very direct cage. The realm of the evil spirit's martial technique and origin energy foundation were far superior to Quan Jinwei's. Clang! Ding Meng didn't hesitate. He quickly increased his origin energy, and a majestic crown shield appeared around his body. He could see that as the shrinking bubbles approached the shield, they were quickly vaporized and dissipated. Even so, Ding Meng's movements were still slowed down by the effects of the adamantium system's origin energy. Jiangning did not recognize it, but Ding Meng instantly sensed it. The supreme eyes of the Green Tree tribe had mysteriously opened again. According to the tree god's explanation, the Frogman Kingdom, the Divine War Star region, and the Grand Prosperity Kingdom were probably all subordinate regions of the Green Spirit race. However, Ding Meng still could not figure it out. The Holy Grail Federation and the Norse Empire are both human worlds. Why do they belong to different races? The tree god said, the Norse Empire belongs to the true martialist race, which is what you call psionicis and origin ability users. They grow by absorbing the energy produced by the explosion of the universe's singularity. It's completely different from the way we Green Spirit race grow through the Holy Spirit race. The humans of the Holy Grail Federation come from another intelligent race. In addition to using origin ability to grow, they are also good at technological research and development. They grow through the explosive growth of technology. In addition, there is a civilization in the Devourer world that originates from the Strange Body race. They grow through devouring. The spirit bird that followed you to Planet 36 belongs to the Strange Body race, but it has some of the characteristics of our Green Spirit race, which is that it loves peace and respects nature. Ding Meng was still confused. Fortunately, Xiao AI explained it to him. The universe was created by the explosion of the singularity. The origin of everything is this singularity. In other words, whether it's humans or monsters, they are essentially one family. There's no need to distinguish them too clearly. Forget it. If he could not figure it out, he would not think about it. Ding Meng raised his head again and asked, "Is this a prison?" The tree god said, "Correct." Sure enough, Ding Meng hurriedly asked, "Is it the strange spirit that I just killed?" The tree god said, "It is indeed a spirit that is imprisoned, and it's a Green Spirit race. My duty is to watch over it and prevent it from escaping from here and destroying the environment. However, what you killed was not a spirit, but a wisp of the spirit soul." This, Ding Meng and Xiao AI were dumbfounded again. Such a strange and powerful spirit was not complete, but a wisp of the soul race's soul. It was impossible to imagine how terrifying a complete spirit would be. The tree god said, In the prophecy left by the king, there was something about me. He said that one day, with my strength, I would not be able to completely control this evil member of the soul race, and a part of its soul would slip out of the prison. However, at that time, the chosen one would come and help me get rid of it. Now it seems that this person should be you, because you have the divine light weapon. This kind of advanced weapon can't make it invisible again. As long as it is poisoned, this wisp of soul will not be able to recover. Ding Ming was also shocked. Even with your powerful strength, you still can't trap it. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.